All right, everybody. Welcome to They Live by Film, a platform for interviews and movie discussion from around the world. I think that was closer than the last time I tried it. We'll see. Adam will let me know when he edits this. Today with me, we are going to be doing our second episode of Lars von Trier. Me and Chris decided we could not endure this alone, so we have brought a special guest with us today. Celeste, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and tell everyone why you decided to be miserable with the rest of us?
Uh, sure. My name is Celeste Cabra. I use they and she pronouns. I make videos on YouTube.net about cult and art house films, generally speaking. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I actually really like really fucked up, emotionally taxing movies. So, this was right up my alley. And Lars von, you guys are saying Trier. I've always thought it was Trier, so we might be going back and forth on that one. I'm actually not sure if I'm
Well,
wrong
here's a
about
good
that.
rule of thumb. If I am pronouncing it, it's probably wrong. That is why I did not say the entire name of yours on my screen. I just knew I would like butcher it. So,
Oh, that's okay. Um, yeah, I don't know.
well,
I think
welcome back,
maybe
Celeste.
thank you. Yes, this would be round three for me, right?
It would indeed. Yeah.
I'm
No,
a
it's good.
big fan of this program, so I'm happy to be back.
Thank you. Yeah, and we propositioned you to come and talk about Lars von Trier or Lars von Trier, and I think we gave you the choice of which ones to watch, right? Because when you came
hmm
on, we were talking about Element of Crime on the Criterion one, and you'd said that you love, I believe was it House the Jack Built?
The ones I had seen prior to this were Nymphomaniac and Antichrist, and Antichrist has been
Antichrist
the
was it?
most fresh on my mind, and I was a big fan of that one.
That's what it was. Yeah. So I would have had assumed that you wanted to talk about that, but you said, no, no, I want to watch more. So I appreciate you watching these for the first time. All of them, is that right?
Yeah, these are all first time watches.
oh
Wow.
wow!
Zach,
So
what
I
about
came in
you?
assuming you like really love Dancer in the Dark, and I was like, oh, that's cool because that's gonna be cool to have somebody who's like familiar with the movie. But we all went in. Well, no, Chris, you're familiar with it, right?
Yeah,
That's right.
I will get into it when we talk about these, but this is I champion this movie and I got a lot of hate for championing this movie for people that weren't ready for it. So I learned this is one that helped me adapt my compass of of what to
Well,
recommend.
we might have similar experiences on that front. We'll
Okay,
see.
good. Zach, what about you? What did you see coming in?
Uh, these I had seen Breaking the Waves. Like, I don't know if I'd seen it from beginning to end, but I had seen pieces over the years. Beyond that, the other two were new for me.
Okay. This will be a fun discussion. I guess before we get into all that, what have y'all been watching? Do you, Zach, do you want to start off since you so graciously opened for us?
Oh, sure. I've actually been watching a lot, so I'm trying to narrow down what I've seen lately. I hate Adam's not here because he could like help champion the new Godzilla Kong movie with me, which was pretty dope and pretty dumb. I had a pretty good time, so that was pretty great. It was basically a Saturday morning cartoon. If you like Thundercats, go see it and just go with it with that tone in mind.
Okay.
Um, Beyond that, I've been kind of on a Nick Cage run. Lord of War, 8 millimeter. I watched Drive Angry this when I got home from work. So just normal stuff for me. What about you, Chris?
I had I've identified somebody who's very good at recommending movies that I would like, and she recommended Poor Things, saying it was
Hell
a
yeah.
must see,
It's a great movie.
and she was right. That is one of the most interesting and I could talk about that movie for an hour and a half. Celeste, I guess you saw it based on your reaction.
Well,
Um,
as it so happens, there's a video on my channel analyzing it for 30 minutes. So not quite an hour, but halfway there.
I will I will be watching that, and I'm sorry that I'm not current if that's the case, but I
Oh,
will be
that's
watching
okay.
that later. Um, but yeah, that movie is amazing.
Yeah,
Holy
it's so
cow!
good. Little spoiler for it for the review, but it's amazing. Yeah.
And Zach, based on your reaction, I guess you saw that was that one of the 100 movies you saw in theaters last year?
It was. I had to go. I'm trying to think where I went to see that. Had to go like an hour and a half out of town because it was playing nowhere near me when it
Uh-huh.
first released. And then after that, like 2 weeks later, it was showing up in my local theater. And I'm like, great. Drove all the way that way for nothing, but it was still a good experience. I went to an art house theater in a college town that was
Okay.
showing it. So that was fun. That was fun at least.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Like it just visually, story, characters, uh, writing, just everything. I need to go see more Yorgos films because
I was
that
about to
was
say
the
this was
first
your
one I'd
first,
seen.
right?
And it
Yeah,
was,
yeah,
yeah.
it's great. The Favorite's really
I,
good too. The Favorite and
yeah.
Killing of a Sacred Deer are my two favorites from him.
Okay. Okay. Well, I will be watching all of them now. I think he only has 8 features, so it's time to catch up because that was a singular experience for me. One of those ones that just kind of stopped me in my tracks.
Mhm.
Also, if y'all don't know about this, I want to tell you both, and then also slash anybody who's listening. Grindhouse Video is very clever, and they've introduced a lightly damaged section on their website.
Okay.
And I just scored the limited second sight edition for Drive, the 4K limited edition for like $50.
Oh, I'm both happy for you and I hate you quite a bit for how much I paid for that thing.
Yeah. And now it does have a bend. It does have a dent a little bit in the top left corner, but I'm not the kind of person that cares about that.
No, I mean I would sacrifice the $250 additional I paid for that to have a
Jesus.
dent. Yeah, it was pricey. Thank God for a tax return last year for that. Uh, I don't have to be responsible with a tax return.
Well, this is making up for you getting Chungking Express for $15 or whatever you did, $20 or whatever.
Shit, it's still on my shelf somewhere. I need to send that out because I still have
I
it.
think I think Chunking Express I paid like 70 for, and I think that is the most I've paid for like a single release, like out of print.
Yeah, yeah,
Because I mean, there's box sets, right? Like the Severin All the Haunts set was like 170 on pre-order, and I bought that. But in terms of like, oh, some a single thing is out of print, I need to go find it. I think. Well, I mean, also the Guillermo del Toro trilogy on Blu-ray, the Criterion one. I think I paid 150 for that. But again, that's a box set, so I don't know.
We don't
yeah.
have to name each one. I'll be fine if we don't. I'm good.
This is what spirals Zach into depression. You start going, how much of the COVID money he spent on out of print stuff.
The government gave me
Uh,
a new couch and a new TV. I had to play something on the TV.
That's true.
what have you been watching, Celeste?
Um, Well, as it so happens, a lot of projects have kind of been lining up all at once, keeping me very busy in terms of watching things for quote unquote work reasons.
Okay.
So the Lars von Trier stuff.
Hmm.
There was a Godzilla thing that I don't think has been announced yet, so I'll just leave it at that. So I was rewatching some Godzilla stuff.
Okay.
Um, I'm currently working on an online cult and exploitation course with Dr. Will Dodson. So I've been watching a lot of Golden Age exploitation films for the first couple episodes of that. Um,
Oh, hell
and
yeah.
I'm working on a analysis video for Immaculate, which I saw in the theater and really loved. So I think I have a lot to say about that one.
Wow.
Immaculate is
There,
it was such a fascinating watch for me. Like
Hmm.
I love the second half. And I know you're going to talk about it more, so I don't expect you to like respond too much. I know you got a whole video to do, but it was one of those things where I went in and it was like this really slow crawl, and I'm like, okay, are they trying to do like kind of a shining thing? Things aren't quite right. We're just kind of taking our time, but I was like, we don't have enough time for that. And then
Hmm.
suddenly it turns into what it does in the second half, and I'm like, this I dig. I can get into this now.
Hmm.
interesting. There's two movies coming out this year about virgin births that are like horror movie kind of related, right? There's like a bit of a trend this year in that very specific topic.
What's the
Does it
other
happen
one?
in First Omen? Does that happen?
Yeah, I think First Omen
Okay,
Oh,
is the
I
other
okay.
haven't
one.
seen
Yeah.
First Omen yet.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I've heard it's good actually. So.
Same. I was surprised. That's why I didn't even put it on. Like I was like, I'll see it when it's on Peacock or whatever. It's fine.
Hmm.
And then I was like, oh, it's good. Okay. Okay.
The
That's
trailer
funny.
had
Well, speak.
Fever Ray in it, which was pretty sick. I was like, okay, okay. I'm intrigued, and now apparently it's good. So I actually do want to go see that.
Yeah. That would be. Are you someone that spends a lot of time in theaters as you are able to, Celeste?
I am not actually. I actually don't prefer the theater experience. I'm very much a creature of habit and comfort, and I like my subtitles. I like being able to pause when I have to use a bathroom or if I get hungry. I have a really nice actually home theater setup at home, so that's typically where I spend most of my time, but I'm trying to
Mhm.
make myself go out more to see more contemporary things specifically for the channel because reviewing that kind of stuff is more current or more click
Oh,
friendly,
okay.
I guess. It's
Sure.
sort of half cynical and half like, well, I would like to be more abreast of the things happening in film now as opposed to 40, 50 years ago all the time, you know?
Yeah, right. Well, we're the tale of opposites here. Zach saw 100 movies last year in theaters, and I saw two. So we have
I
both that.
probably saw less than 10. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
to give you an idea.
See, every
Yeah.
year we do this thing where we did what's the top 5 new movies you saw this year, and Chris is like, I think I've seen 3, and he's like, I got to watch like 2 more so I can have it for a list.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
That's kind of where I'm at. Like if you go in my letterbox, like most of the recent things that were released last year, a good amount of them are literally like Vinegar Syndrome documentaries produced for older films. It's kind of
Yep.
embarrassing.
Yep. Well, you're a student of the of cinema, right?
Mm, that's one way to put it.
That's funny. Well, speaking of subtitles, quickly before we jump in, I just want to quickly say fuck Curzon
Yeah.
because, like, how do you put a box set that's that beautiful, charge over $100 for it, and not front for English subtitles? Like, come on, yo, that's crazy.
That's that's kind of embarrassing, but also like I would be enraged. Like I would want my money back or something. Like I think the last time that happened was when I rented the 4K of the Return of the Swamp Thing, which is not nearly as important of a film, right?
Well,
Is that an
I
MVD
Well,
guess.
title?
it's subjective. Huh?
Yeah.
Is that MVD film? Is that who put that out?
Uh Lightyear is who put that out, and I have
Okay.
no idea who they are, honestly,
Yeah,
but
that's
it
odd.
it didn't have subtitles on it, and I was like, "Are we really doing this? Like a brand new like boutique 4K release, and you're not going to put English SDH subtitles on this?" I mean, it's not only like my own preference, and I have a little bit more of like I can play I have an auditory processing sort of problem card, so like I do kind of need it, but like I will be okay without it. But like whenever this happens, I'm just like, "Oh, so deaf people don't get to watch the movie. That's so cool.
Yeah,
Great."
exactly.
Well, it's like me and Chris talked about last time. I struggle heavily with accents, and it's like when we
Hmm.
were watching Element of a Crime, everyone's speaking English, but in very
Hmm.
thick accents, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
I'm not catching everything that's happening. I'm just
Yeah.
Yeah.
going with the flow at this point. So I need it just real like it's like when I watch Peaky Blinders or anything else. I'm just
Hmm.
like, yeah, please give me subtitles. I know it's in English, but I can't
Yeah.
understand it.
Yeah. I don't have a good home theater system. I have a 6-year-old who's asleep in their room next to the living room, and we live in a small house, so I just don't have
Hmm.
volume. So I
Well,
just
yeah,
like
there you
have
go.
to I
There's
just have
another
to have
because
subtitles.
I'm also this. I don't have kids, but like my partners both go to sleep. Like they have work early in the morning, and I have work. Well, I had work kind of early in the morning. So like I
Yeah.
generally stay up about 2.5 hours later than they do, and that's typically when I will put on a film or two, and I can't have the surround sound cranked up when I do that. So
Yeah.
subtitles.
Yep. Please put them on. I'm gonna post every time we watch a Lars von Trier movie, and I'm gonna take a picture of it and put it on Instagram and ask hers on why they don't have subtitles. And it's gonna be super obnoxious, but it's
Oh,
gonna be my
do
small
it for Dancer in the
protest.
Dark and say, look, I have subtitles. Oh wait, I rented this off Amazon. That's why it has subtitles.
No, I own a 20-year-old DVD of that movie, and it had subtitles.
Oh, that's
And I was
sad.
like,
That's even sadder.
"Come on, Curzon." Yeah. Uh, all right. Well, since we tapped into the Lars von Trier or Trier thing, you wanna kick us off there, Zach?
Yeah, let me do that. So Chris, we did a really good job splitting these up, at least at this time, because apparently this is the beginning of a trilogy. We're going to be starting with Breaking the Waves, which is in a small and conservative Scottish village, a woman's why are you making me do this? I can't read. Paralytic husband convinces her to have a extramarital intercourse so she can tell him about it and give him a reason for living. That is what the movie is about. So, Chris, where are we at on our rankings? Where does the world say this lands?
So this is a very beloved movie from Lars von Trier.
Okay.
It is a top 250 movie. Despite falling 28 spots last year, it is currently at 218.
Okay. So it was in the
Right.
top 200 last time, but it's fallen
It
a little
was in
out of
the
that.
it was in the top 200s. Right now, it's right below Umberto Z and Moonlight and The Thing.
What ranking or what list is this that you're referring to?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's my favorite movie list. No, no,
Oh,
no, no, no.
I
There's
like checked my letterbox real quick and I was like, okay, it's not the letterbox 250. I'm wondering what it is. So it's yours. It's
no, no, no,
the
no.
official canon.
I wish, I wish. There's a. Have you heard of the list called "They Shoot Pictures"? Don't they?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah. So we use that as a reference. I mean, it just has 24,000 movies and like 13,000 critics list. So it's a fairly good representation of like some form of a canon. And Zach hates
Oh,
it. He
I
disagrees
despise
with
it.
it.
so
I
wait,
cook
wait, wait,
all
wait.
the time. I hate it.
Wait, so just to clarify, so the position you just quoted, is that on the They Shoot Pictures list?
Hmm.
Oh, I thought
Yeah.
this was your personal top 250.
No, no,
Okay.
it was a bad joke. No, this is yeah, this is They Shoot Pictures top 250, number 218
Got
specifically.
you. Okay.
Yeah.
And if we get into horror, which half of this stuff is weird, they pick some weird stuff on the horror list of They Shoot Zombies. So sometimes we'll reference that. Chris is going to check right now, and it's probably on there
No,
because they
it's
put
not. I
war
was
movies. I was like, they put war movies on there, so who knows? Like,
yeah. I'm trying to see if any of the movies we're on tonight will be on there. No. Yeah, one of them is. One of the movies tonight will be.
okay,
So,
I know which one.
two of them are. Two. Oh, fascinating. Two of them are. Okay.
We're
Well,
only
that'll
saying
be an
three, and it's
interesting.
not this one. So,
We know what the other two are. Yes, so that's it. Celeste, as the guest and as somebody who's finished the movie very recently, what is your knee-jerk reaction to watching Breaking the Waves?
Um, I want to say confused, but not in that I didn't understand what happened, but that I'm unsure what the film is trying to tell me thematically. Um,
Okay.
I kind of wish I had started with this one so I could have more time to process it because I think the other two are a lot more straightforward in terms of like what the themes are.
Yeah.
Um, like I have an interpretation ready to go for the other two, but uh, as we were saying in our pre-show banter that may or may not make the final cut, I just finished this like 20 minutes ago, and I am a little bit at a loss as in terms of diagnosing a consistent theme or a message that I feel like is attempting to be conveyed here. I have theories that I could go through, but I think this is the sort of thing that I probably should have slept on before talking about it with any kind of authority to an audience. But we're gonna go
It's
for
okay.
it anyway. We're gonna wing it,
It's
you know?
okay. Yeah, we'll dive in. That's funny. Zach, what about you? If this was this was not your first time seeing it, right?
not really. I mean, it might as well have been.
Hmm.
I remembered like some random bits and pieces, but I mean, if somebody were to ask me before I watched it, what is Breaking the Waves about? I'd be like, I'd probably accidentally start putting some melancholia in there and be like, that's what it's
Hmm.
about, right? Like, there's a little bit there in there, but yeah. So I really enjoyed it. I was a little bit hesitant to watch this one. I don't really know why. Maybe it's because I have like a little bit of bitterness of where Curzon put out a 4K of this, but didn't include it in the very expensive box set. So I was probably a little bit bitter, but I really did love it. I do agree with Celeste of trying to kind of decipher what the film is trying to say. I do have something. I think we'll get into it more as we go. I do think it is kind of like this weird exploration of like what unconditional love can kind of look
Mm,
like in its
mhm.
ugliest and sometimes its prettiest form.
Yeah.
And I think it does convey that pretty well. But you know, as someone who's not the biggest romance guy, where I think the only one on my top 100 is the 2005 Pride and Prejudice movie. I really enjoyed it. I had a really good time with this one. So yeah, I'll leave it there for now. What about you, Chris?
A rip-roaring good time.
Yeah.
Zachary Quinto, right?
A romp, if you
Yes.
will.
Raw.
Yes.
Pride and Prejudice and Breaking the Waves. Let's
Same
see.
An
movie.
excellent double feature, I think.
Yeah. I agree.
European
Um,
romances through history.
The question
oh,
is
fuck.
like, I think you can determine if you're a positive or negative person depending on which one you end with.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's
Like,
true.
you
That's
can
true.
really mess your whole day up if you want to.
Um, okay, so the one just very quickly, I like this movie a lot, so I'll get that out of the way. But um,
Well, it's in your
Celeste, we
personal top 200, right?
according to
Exactly.
yeah, exactly. So we had finished last time we recorded with Europa, which I would say, Celeste, if you have not seen it, have you seen Europa from him?
Mm-mm, no.
Okay, that might be his most like the movie that Lars von Trier made that anybody could see and enjoy.
Okay.
It's just like this magical realism kind of. I don't even know exactly how to describe it. It just it plays with black and white and color. It's super creative. The story is not quite so intense as his other movies.
No, yeah,
Um,
that's kind of sad when the World War II movie is his most hopeful film.
just
Yeah.
recently ended World War II, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
but yeah, and then for him to come out from there, basically two student films, to then Europa to then this, just like a insane first four features. Like we just finished Kubrick as well, and it's interesting. Kubrick took this jump from basically like garbage to The Killing, which is like this amazing heist film. And I kind of feel a similar way about Von Trier. Like he just went from decent, kind of interesting movies to Europa, which was so unique, and then this, which was like so nuanced and complex. And this is going to be a theme for me as we go through these three movies today. I'm constantly amazed at how somebody who is so publicly provocative and loves conflict so much and seems to come across as such an arrogant asshole can still have such a deep empathy and understanding of like very complicated human emotions. Um, I like there's so much going on in this film that is both, like you said, Zach. I think you captured it well. Like it's both kind of heartwarming at times of seeing somebody who's just fanatical and kind of obsessive in her love for this guy who's, um, I mean, I guess quite, what's the word, abusive, and but does kind of love her in his own way as well. And then the turn that the movie makes, I don't know how much we want to get into spoilers. Certainly not yet, but I don't know if we decide to do it at the end. But the last 20 minutes just had me really leaving, kind of feeling like deflated because it all of a sudden became about something different than I was thinking it was going to be about. And I don't know if I liked I don't know if I liked meaning like it didn't feel good the way that it ended. I think I mean that in a positive way. Like I think it's a powerful ending, but I just didn't want it to end that way. Like I didn't like that character. So, but yeah, I'm amazed at how somebody who was probably in his mid 20s could have made this picture.
Which I wanted to kind of go back to where you're talking. I think you're talking a little bit about Skarsgård's character. What is his name? Jan, if I'm
Hmm.
correct. Yeah, Jan. Um, I think one of the things that's kind of interesting because they kind of go through this whole, what do you call it, like a timeline of a typical relationship, right? There's the honeymoon
Mm-hmm.
phase, which we get a pretty good amount of. They don't really rush that, and then we kind of get the bitter married couple in a sense, or at least the incredibly unhappy to the extreme abusive end of it. And it all for them happens within how many days is it? Like 2 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
2 3 weeks. I mean, it's not long because he's gone for a certain like 10 days and he was going to come back for 7, but he gets injured before that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's wild how they swing this and they kind of make it work, and it kind of does this exploration for what it is.
Yeah, and her character I think is interesting to set up a little bit because she comes from a very conservative, non-sexual background. right? Very sort of
Hmm.
stereotypical Protestant, like
As a
old school
Calvinist
European.
specifically, which is
They're
pretty brutal.
Calvinist.
Hmm.
Okay. I did
Okay,
not catch
yeah.
that.
So very much like not free to explore her that like emotional side, right? Calvinists are very logic driven, right?
Mm.
Probably to a fault. Uh, and then she has this sort of sexual awakening, and she loves it. like, like Stellan Skarsgård is kind of represented as this sort of like free spirited guy, and she loves sex with him, and sort of seems to be very happy early on, right? I mean, I don't think there's any hint of like she seems very happy, just to say it like that, in the
Hmm.
first phase of their relationship, right?
Yeah, it's pretty much bordering on obsession. Which I mean, you can kind of get into that too of like what is like true love if you want to get into like that sort of conversation. But it's weirdly wholesome and scary. Like when you watch her, you're like, it's I almost wish my cat would love me that much. Like at least would be sad if something happened to me and wouldn't just eat me. That would be nice. And I'll tell you the one thing I really loved early on with their relationship when it was kind of exploring the early parts was the part where he's going to leave on the plane and she goes and like starts hitting this like metal pole
Uh-huh.
against this in frustration. And he goes up there and he just does the same thing. I was like, because
Hmm.
I was sitting there waiting on this like big blow up or some
Yeah.
because I mean, Trier does like his melodrama. So I was waiting on this big melodrama scene, but I thought that was such a nice detail, and it really made me weirdly root for that relationship a lot
I,
more because it
I
isn't just
really
some.
love that scene too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of nice that he identified like, look, this is who she is, and even when
Exactly.
he gets teased, he doesn't care. He gets teased about
Hmm.
it. He just
Exactly. I think he starts off as actually a very good like character and a very good partner for her. Like he like meets her on her level with the kind of like histrionics and like the very passionate like love affair. And I really love that moment and that like she's having like a bit of a public meltdown because of her very obvious mental illness. And
Yeah.
rather than like be ashamed of that or shame her for that or yell at her or anything like that, he just like matches her energy and like kind of signals to her in her own language that he's feeling the same kind of sense of impending loss or impending like grief at their having to be apart. I think it's a really beautiful kind of touching moment.
yeah, I think it really brings in more because I think if you go in that melodrama or you go into an argument, when he has that horrible event happen to him where he gets brain injury basically and paralyzed, it would be harder to not understand where she's coming from. But you're like, yeah, I get it. Like
Right.
this is who she wants to be with. And I think, you feel bad for him because it's like he didn't ask for this. He does
Mm.
some things he shouldn't have done. He did some things, he's not in the right head to tell her to do. And he kind of realizes that as the film goes on. But, you at least still kind of root for him in a way to get better.
You saw like the good, right? You saw those
Yeah.
moments where it was
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
almost like
it's
a perfect relationship to a fault from two, or at least, some flawed people, what you'd want to see.
have you all both seen Punch Drunk Love?
It's
Yeah,
been a while.
I love that one.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting because she plays basically Skarsgård's character in that movie, right? In the way of, at least in well, Skarsgård's character in the beginning of the relationship when things are good, she kind of plays that calming effect to Adam Sandler's character, who has more of
Mm.
that like histrionics and anger and stuff, right? There's a scene in Punch Drunk Love that is like one of the most romantic things I've ever seen, where he's like, he's like punching the bed or he's punching the headboard or something, and they're just kind of being intimate in bed, and she just like responds back in kind with the same energy, and he just kind of like looks at her and he's like, "This is nice," and it's like the most, it's just this warm feeling of like acceptance for being imperfect, and I love that, and I think there's some moments early on here that in this film that capture that as well. But then, like you said, he gets injured. Okay, so he asks her to go be with other men, uh, and she's completely unprepared for that, basically, right? Given her background, Like she doesn't understand what that means. Like she can't just like be a sexual person. That's not really who she is outside of the relationship, right? So she's like
Yeah.
bad at it.
Where have we landed on spoilers?
I
Um,
usually we're just like, I guess, is there really I guess up to the uh death of a certain character, I guess we'll say. We can hold that till the end.
yeah, yeah. If we
Okay.
could just like if we can just leave out the last like 20 minutes of the movie, maybe until we make a spoiler warning, that would be great. Or we could just do it now, I guess. I don't know. But what is it possible to make your point without a spoiler warning?
If it's
I think
if it's
so. Yeah.
okay.
For now, anyways. I'm not sure that I
Yeah,
can
yeah,
meaningfully comment on the overall trajectory or themes of the film without discussing the very end, but
yeah.
for right
Right,
now,
right,
yeah.
right.
Um,
Okay, so what were you thinking?
I think one thing I want to at least throw out there is like, it wasn't entirely clear to me the nature of his affliction, but I think there was some kind of comment about fluids entering his brain, and they were talking about how it's going to get worse and all this other stuff. I just remember there was a comment specifically as it relates to his brain's ability to function as it usually does, and I wonder if the the things he's asking her to do are not necessarily informed by who he was prior to the accident or who he is as a person in good
Hmm.
health, and
Hmm.
rather a sort of side effect of what is quite literally damaging his brain. Because, like, not only is he asking her to do something that she might not be personally comfortable with in terms of her own understanding of monogamy or sexual exploration or whatever, but like in the extremely fundamentalist church that she's a part of, that he is very much not a part of, but he would have to understand to some extent that asking her to do that is essentially asking her to be excommunicated and lose all the people that she loves. So, like, I don't know, it doesn't strike me as in keeping with his character to ask her to do something like that.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
but
Yeah, I
maybe,
agree with that. Yeah.
maybe it is like maybe this is the sort of thing where like it's such a terrible thing that this is kind of his way of asking her to leave him behind so she can pursue her own life. Maybe this is in his mind like a loving thing that he's doing because he's calling her bluff that she won't do it. I'm not sure. I don't think we can know his character motivations for doing that, but I think that there are indications that he's not of sound mind when he comes up with this idea.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of it comes from, you look at what is that O. Henry story, The Gift of the Magi sort of thing, where you have a character, a showing of love is her not wanting to be with someone else. This doesn't matter. She is going to see this through to the end because all she
Hmm.
wants is to have him. But
Right.
it's also this form where, even if he is not in sound mind, there has to be at least like maybe it's a perversion of that thought, but the idea that asking her to wait for a man who she's never gonna have anyone else. They've barely been together for that long, and asking her to not try to move on or be with someone else is in its own form of love as well. But they're almost opposite thoughts of
Hmm.
like what it is, even though they're both trying to show an emotion, and then it kind of gets perversed as the rest of the movie goes on.
So the way we're talking about this just gave me an idea that I didn't connect until right now. But all three of these are either the mind that we're going to talk about today are either the mind or body breaking down and how people react to that on some level, right?
Hmm.
And the interesting thing maybe about the idiots when we get to it is that it's more of a choice, possibly. I think that'll be an interesting discussion. But regardless, there's a common theme here about sort of how regular, well, I shouldn't say regular, how people react to either the mind or the body, like breaking down, and how it impacts their relatively normal, stable life that they're trying to build, right? Um, and I think
Able-bodied people, I think.
yes, able-bodied. Thank you. Um, and I think like the thing that was so heartbreaking for me of watching, I don't know if we want to call it phase two of this or like sort of the middle of the film here for me, was you see her character, there's like if you're in kind of a more progressive family growing up, you have interesting table conversations about what would happen if you did this or what would happen if you did that, or maybe you're allowed to read more adult material. you just have a broader sense of how the world works. And she went out of love for her husband, who's sort of awakened something exciting in her. She went out and became this character, sort of performing, I think, of something she didn't want to be and didn't really have any strength or experience in. And it was extremely hard to watch. Just her sort of, for me, just basically just kind of continue to break down and just
Mm.
not, almost like not be able to come back from it, right? Once she started going down that path, it's like she she just didn't really, she just lost herself in this kind of person she was trying to be for him. And there was not really that nuance in their relationship to figure out, maybe because he had brain damage or whatever it was, but like he wasn't probably the right support system for her that she needed to process that journey.
Mm.
So she's kind of left on her own, and like this, the town started to turn on her, her parents started to turn on her, and you're just, I don't know, the whole time I was just like, fuck, like she's like this pure soul kind of who just doing something out of such a kind place, and you're just watching her kind of tear down, and that was like, I don't know, the middle part was is heartbreaking, I think, for me.
Yeah, because you also have like when you talk about her support system, all she really has besides Jan is her friend. And
Hmm.
she's kind of in a hard place because obviously she has been explicitly told, which people should, support your significant other through anything.
Hmm.
That's great. That's what you decided to do, and that's awesome. But she also has had this beat into her head from her religion to the point where she's having someone who was married into that religion who isn't as tied to it, who is her friend, is being like, you really, really, really need to look at this a little bit back. Like you need to like pull yourself out of this and see what's going on. And she just can't do it. And that's really what it is, because her friend is her support system, but she doesn't understand what her friend is trying to tell her the whole time.
Yeah, yeah,
So that brings up an interesting and rather difficult dynamic where in the Calvinist tradition, and I hope I have this right in terms of its theology, but at least in the film, it's explicitly said where the priest says, after they have that initial fight when he brings it up, and she freaks out and yells at him, um, the priest explicitly tells her, "Hey, you have to honor your husband. Like, it's on
yeah,
you to like be the person to fix this, you know?"
right.
But what happens when honoring your husband means doing something that the church forbids, right? It kind of puts her in this literally impossible position where she has to kind of negotiate in her own mind, like a way in which she's not, where she's doing both, where even though she's breaking the laws of the church, like there's even that part where she says you can't love a word, you can't love the law, you have to love a person. And like the way that she justifies this is like, having these back and forth conversations with God where like she is telling herself through God's voice or whatever that
That's right.
what she's doing is the most pious and holy thing because it will keep him alive, even if it is against the letter of the law, right?
Yeah.
So it's, I think maybe I shouldn't say it because it might indicate something, but I think sacrifice is like a huge theme in this film, and this sort of sacrificing of her own morals, of her own community, and of her own kind of will to keep her husband alive and to keep um, his will at the forefront of her mind, right?
So I think
That's
we
super
have kind of
interesting.
gotten to the point where, instead of tiptoeing, and I think it's good to just like spoiler warning. We're gonna be
Yeah,
talking
yeah, yeah.
about the end of this film. So skip ahead if you haven't seen it yet. I think all of us give a recommendation to it. So
It's
just go
pretty
ahead.
neat. Check it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Go check it out. Decide what you believe, but we're gonna sit here and talk about the end. So I will see y'all for the idiots, the rest of you guys. So what'd you think about her dying?
You know, I want to get into that, but quickly, Celeste, you helped me understand something about this movie, I think, the way you just said that. So I wonder if, because Denmark is one of the core places where Calvinism sort of really took off theologically, right? There's sort of
Mm.
Sweden, Denmark, like the Nordic countries. I don't know, I haven't talked much about religion at all as far as my background, because I'm not that religious anymore, but I was a Calvinist for like 5 or 6 years
Oh
in
wow, really?
college. Yeah. So 20
Okay,
years
well
ago
then you
or
can
whatever.
tell me a lot more about because I was raised Catholic and now I'm like a staunch anti-theist,
Sure.
atheist, fucking edgelord person. But
Yeah,
you can tell me
sure.
more about that because I don't have any direct experience with it.
There's an interesting movie that I think is not related to this at all, other than being Danish. Dreyer, Carl Theodor Dreyer made.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm going to remember the name here in just a second. But it's all about basically Calvinism versus other Christian sects or other Christian sort of,
Hmm.
derivatives, right?
Denominations.
Denominations. There you go. Thank you. And it is very critical of the fact that they just get these old white men sitting in a room arguing over points that don't matter, ultimately. And Dreyer does a beautiful job of creating a miracle in that movie and having the two religious denominations not recognize the miracle and not know what to do with it because they're too busy fighting over theology and kind of exposing the fact that it's all bullshit. And I think as you're talking about this, I'm wondering if this is not what Ventura is doing here a little bit of exposing the fallacy of this strict religious teaching and kind of
Hmm.
exposing the fact that it just simply breaks down under scrutiny,
Hmm.
right? Like if you're going to create a perfect world
Yeah.
where everything kind of goes according to plan, then you have the luxury of building up this code and this set of rules and living by it. But as soon as shit starts to break down, it just gets messy. And like, and what does love look like in that? I think I'm kind of seeing like this might be more of the point of this film the more we talk about it, because it's starting to make sense to me a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a big theme is like martyrdom, like because we get into that for a long time. We're just saying, look, he's just getting better, he's getting worse. What she's doing
Uh,
does not matter. But the end of the film kind of hints that it's kind of possible. I mean, not the very, very end,
Hmm.
but like him getting better before we get to the church bells at the end. You're just like, is this like this type of sainthood thing? Or, I know there's like a whole miracle requirement for that, and I don't know enough to talk about that. But
Yeah.
it's this it talks about like these interesting ideas of doing that. And I mean, you look at like how religions are born and they change. It's usually from someone breaking a lot of rules.
mhm.
So, in a sense, it kind of feels like that. For anything to change, she has to break some sort of rules to kind of get that freedom. Because the banishment is, she doesn't get to really endure that because she gets sick right afterwards, but it probably could have been the best thing for her, as sad as that is, because that was all the stress she had, was not wanting to get banished and put into a mental facility.
Right.
Um, I'm gonna try to just work through my own feelings about this because I'm not sure where I land on it, but there is this idea of martyrdom, as you said, where she sacrifices herself and it does work, at least ostensibly. Like he does end up being able to walk again when previously he was on death's door, and it seems to turn around right at the moment that she um almost like a sequence that plays out like a like the Passion or something like that,
Hmm.
where she
Hmm.
goes to
Like
this
he was the
site.
pilot when he
Hmm.
signed her name. Yeah, when he signed it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I like that.
Hmm. Yeah, she's like going to the Mount Sinai or whatever of like or the Golgotha or whatever the place is called of like the ship where she's brutalized and then comes back and is sort of like, you know, goes through this death, and then there's almost like this resurrection at the very end where they can't find her body
Hmm.
in the fucking, what do you call it?
Coffin, right?
The the ship thing. They're searching for like fuck, what do you call it? It's at the very end.
That's
Uh,
where the like when they
Well,
bury the coffin, they bury just a coffin of dirt, right?
sure, sure. But then
Yeah.
they
yeah.
dump her body in the sea, and then
Oh, they don't
at the
see anything
very
on the
end, they're
The
radar.
pointing
Yeah.
at the
the
radar. Thank you,
sonar.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, the
The
radar.
sonar.
Uh-huh.
Thank you. Yeah, it
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
show up there, and then there's like heavenly bells ringing, or at least
Yeah, yeah,
this back
yeah.
at this idea of
Right.
magical realism. Um, and I don't know, it like in a way kind of fulfills this prophecy of like doing whatever you must do to like serve your husband or ensure his survival, right? I think you could accuse this film of having like a very misogynistic bent to it, where like
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
woman is expected to go through hell and back, um, and literally sacrifice her own life, her own consent, all these other things, such that the man can persevere. And it is treated as like a very, or at least it looks as though it's a very hopeful, kind of beautiful ending to this tale, you know, where he finally gets to hear the bells that like fulfills their wedding where they were absent, right? Um, I'm not sure where I land on if that's actually what is happening in a straightforward way, or if it's like kind of playing that out to its logical conclusion to see the kind of destructiveness and folly of that kind of idea. You know what I mean?
I feel like it's the latter. I feel like it's
Yeah, I
for
kind of get
me.
that too. Yeah, a little bit.
Go ahead, Zach.
No, I was just agreeing with you, but yeah, I kind of feel the same that it it has its own form of like hopefulness to it. It's a very odd thing with von Trier because he has like these ray of hope in these like really depressing and hopeless films. But like with that, it's the greatest act of unconditional love you can give somebody, right? Is the idea that you will lose the only thing you have so they will live.
Hmm.
Whether or not it's
Oh,
true or whatever, she did it thinking this is what was going to happen. And but the the sad part about that is she's still dead. Like, he doesn't get to,
Hmm.
experience her life with him or anything like that. It almost feels like this bittersweetness that just like sits there when it's over.
so I have a mm, okay. Maybe this is gonna make me sound like a cynic, but I guess I already kind of have been established as one a little bit on here. But um, I think the way you portray that is exactly how I felt. Except that, I don't know if this is maybe you're kind of feeling this way too, Zach. I don't know, but the only thing I would add is that I think because it follows it through to the logical conclusion, I think it's a powerful ending because I think it's Von Trier in a way saying like, look how messed up this is. Like this is what it's supposed to look like, but like it's. I had a very similar feeling. What's the La Strada, the Fellini movie? Have y'all seen that?
Oh, you're the
Mm-mm.
Fellini guy.
No,
I had a
I've
very
missed that
similar.
one.
Okay, that's fine. It's heartbreaking. Like this poor woman just gets tortured and beaten and left for dead. And there's a lot of debate online that is hopeful in the way that she chooses to love. Um, and I just call bullshit on that. Like it's a terrible, tragic movie, and I've gotten a lot of flack for not being intelligent enough to like get it.
Mhm.
But like I just don't watch. I don't like watching women get abused, and so like
Hot
Lestrada is
take.
very hard, right? Lestrada is very difficult for me to watch. Whatever the intent of Fellini there, like it's just very difficult to watch because she's treated like an animal. And I had a similar feeling here a little bit that, like, for the sake of religious ideology and theology, her life doesn't matter anymore. So she's willing to sacrifice everything in order for her husband to be healed, and he's healed. So that's beautiful, right?
Hmm.
Except it sucks, and it's like it's not. I guess it's not. It's the ultimate act of love on her part. Um, and she felt like the best way to die would be to go back to that boat for the guys that wanted to abuse her in the first place, and she was right.
And
Um,
he's got to live with that though, right? Like I don't know how much they establish what he really understands from when he was sick, but like that's always kind of the hard part, right? If you're the person who's got to live with it, the
Yeah,
person that somebody else died for you.
I imagine they're like, "Hey, bud, do you remember the bit where you said she had to do this to so that you could continue to live?" And he's like, "Yeah, I remember that." And she's like, "Cool." So she went to like the most dangerous spot for like cruising, like known to our village, and they beat her to death. I think you could pretty easily put two and two together that they were correlated.
yeah.
Udo
So
Kier
yeah,
was
I
there. He's like,
mean,
whoa, whoa, whoa! I didn't know Udo was there. Nobody told me that.
so like,
But I
yeah,
wonder, yeah, go ahead.
he gets this like this symbol of like, hey, I've done this for you. Like
Hmm.
this is the true consummation of our relationship is like
Hmm.
what I've done for you.
Mhm.
But I think you're right in that, like, at what cost? Like, he has to live with this, and he has to
Yeah.
live without her, and he's still, injured. He still lives with this disability to some extent,
Yeah.
presumably, right?
Right. Right.
And like, I think that the last scene is really powerful, and it is really beautiful to like see that little glimmer of like love kind of creating this sort of miraculous um result. Um and so I think a lot of people could walk away from that basically being like, well, let's call him LVT to get around any pronunciation debacles.
Uh-huh.
Our
Uh-huh.
man LVT is trying to tell us that like it was a virtuous thing to do, and like it was overall worth it in the end, what she had to endure for the will and the survival of a man and of their church and all this other things.
Hmm.
But I think that that's debatable. I think it
Hmm.
is what's the word I'm looking for? It's not clear cut. There's a gray area there. It could go either
Ambiguity.
way. Ambiguous. Thank you. It is ambiguous how we want to walk away from it feeling whether or not this is something that's being endorsed or
Right.
something that is worth it in the end, right?
Right.
Maybe it's my own biases. I know that our man LVT is not a great guy, as especially as it relates to women. Maybe he is just playing it straight and being like, if you really want to be my wife, you gotta really go through the ringer. Like, that's what I expect. Maybe that is
Nah,
what he's
I
saying.
don't,
I like to
I
think
don't
it's
know.
not, but maybe.
Yeah. Possible. You never know with him. That's funny. Oh, Lars.
But I mean, I
Um,
guess at the end of the day, this is the discussion he wanted people to have. I guess it's
I think
probably
so.
why,
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, this is what he wanted.
You
Whatever
know
you
what?
bring
Yeah.
I
into
don't
it.
I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I am having one last thought, if that's
No, go
okay.
for it. Monopolize you. You're going to
Absolutely.
say something much smarter than me. So go for it.
So the crux of Christianity, like the pivotal event, is the
Hmm.
sacrifice of Christ on the
Hmm.
cross for all of our redemption. And that is
Hmm.
treated as like the most beautiful, the most powerful act of love.
That's
And
right.
I think I've established how it is sort of paralleled in this film, where she does the same thing. And maybe as it relates to this sort of critique or takedown of religious dogma, maybe Lars is asking us to really consider how beautiful that actually is, to like have somebody tortured and killed for the will or for the salvation of others, right?
So this is a more
That's my
subtle
last thought on
passion
it.
of the Christ. Okay.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can
yeah,
get
yeah.
down with that.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, as we talk about it, I didn't have this opinion coming in, but as we talk about it, I'm forming a pretty strong opinion that this is a critique on like the core Christian tenets,
Hmm.
from somebody who was probably
Especially,
raised by them.
I mean, you're talking about Calvinists, right? Like they're kind of,
Hmm.
Calvinists are not big in my area. They're kind of
Hmm.
known as, oh, those are the predestination ones, right? That's kind of like how it
Yep.
is here. So it's always kind of like, oh, it's them, it's those
Yeah,
ones. So
absolutely,
it's
absolutely.
Hmm.
it's an odd one to go through.
I even when I identified as Calvinist, which looking back I laugh at the fact that I seriously thought about that. But even when I identified as that, the biggest argument I had was around the topic of free choice, because if you're predestined to go to heaven, then there's not free choice, right? Free will,
Exactly.
because it's
Hmm.
sort of written like before time, right? Anyways, not to go down that path, but like I just remember not being okay with that and just like really wrestling with that idea that we're like on some kind of puppets or something.
There's
So,
no
anyways,
accountability. Yeah, that's I think that's the tough part. You're not
yeah,
accountable for
It's
anything.
yeah.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So, anyways,
I've been on record as saying I don't believe that free will exists even in a secular context, but I think that that's a much that discussion might be beyond our pay grade for the purposes of a Lars
You're
von
gonna give me
Trier
like
film.
philosophy class, college PTSD is what's gonna happen.
we can
Mm.
uh, we can watch what's that really cheesy Christian movie that came out? There was like 10 of them that were made. It's like a whole series.
Is it God's Not
Um,
Dead?
no, 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 no. This was like 15 years ago. There was a whole bunch of movies. Megiddo is
Mm.
one of them, but whatever. It doesn't matter. Let's just say God's not dead. We can watch that, and then we can get into a deep philosophical discussion on the next podcast. I feel like we've cracked at least enough of breaking the waves to move on. Is there anything else that y'all really want to say about this?
Um,
No, no, I'm good.
I think the only other it's just really these are the types of films I really love because there's so much going on and there's so much
Yeah,
ambiguity and there's so many different themes being explored. But I really
yeah,
think the way that mental illness is portrayed here is super fascinating.
hmm
It's really not 100% clear if she's delusional in her belief that she is influencing these things or if she is behaving the way she is because she has a untreated or perhaps improperly treated mental illness. Like it's clear that she deals with depression and anxiety at an extreme
hmm
degree and also like
hmm
mm, abandonment issues pretty severely,
hmm
right? And these are things
hmm
that can and should be worked through, but not
hmm
by hospitalizing someone against their will and like all these sort of kind of archaic and barbaric means of treating people with mental illnesses, like you sort of see the ending scene where she's being portrayed as just like this psychotic kind of freak
hmm
person and that's why she died. It just feels like there's a lot of systems at place here that are failing her all at once and leading to
Yeah,
this illusion.
And
I
I,
think
you
it's a
know,
well,
and
yeah.
I'll make this quick because I think what you brought up is awesome because it just made me think about the idea that if we look at prophets from 2000 plus years ago, this is pretty much how they'll look, right? So if we're taking this idea at the
Hmm.
end that she really is a martyr, she did get this sainthood or martyrdom or whatever you want to call it. This is pretty much a recreation of what a lot of those people would have went through, or is it because
That's
they
a
were
really
mentally,
interesting point.
yeah, are they mentally unfit, or were they telling the truth? That sort of ambiguity.
Yeah, that's another kind of like dogmatic religious tradition of like people who have been spoken to. I didn't even think about that. That's really interesting, where it's very like to us as the audience, it seems kind of silly when she's talking back to herself. But like if you are a, true believer of this sort of thing, there have been people throughout history who did quote unquote legitimately experience things like that, right? And so it's sort of difficult to make that call from that perspective as to whether or not she is genuine in these visions or these kind of powers that she's been granted. I don't know. I think that our man Lars here is kind of modernizing a lot of like accepted religious dogma and kind of letting that play out in a way that shows the horror of it, but also, maybe there isn't a judgment on it either way. It's just like, hey, this is what this actually looks like. When you
Yeah.
kind of take it to its logical conclusion, you can make up your mind how you feel about it, right?
All right, now that we've finished completely deconstructing Breaking of the Wave, so no one ever has to think about that movie again, we've given you all the answers. You're welcome. We're going to move into the next on. Well, I think we're going with LVT's on his filmography, The Idiots, which is part of the Dogma 95 collective movement. I don't know what they kind of
hmm
considered it as. And I feel like to properly do this justice, to talk about this film, I think a little bit of background is going to be needed for what Dogma 95 was. So there's a lot of pretentious jargon to like explain it. So I'm just going to give you the rules. Essentially, it's like they can't use technical gimmicks and stuff because they thought there was too much CGI and stuff like that going on, too many effects. So they said, well, let's do the complete opposite. So there are 10 rules for this. Rule number one is shooting must be done on location. Props, sets cannot be brought in. If a particular prop is necessary for the story, a location must be chosen to where the prop is found. Two, the sound must never be produced apart from the image or vice versa. Music must not be used unless it occurs in the scene that is being shot. Lars breaks that in this one, so that'll be fun. Three, the camera must be handheld. Any movement or immobility attainable in the hand is permitted. The film must be in color. Special lighting is not acceptable. If there is little light for exposure, the scene must be cut or a single lamp be attached to the camera. Five, optical work and filters are forbidden. Six, the film must not contain superficial action, murders, weapons, etc. Must not occur. Orgies are obviously fine. 7, temporal and geographical alienation are forbidden. This is to say that the film takes place here and now. 8, genre films are not acceptable. 9, the film format must be Academy 35 millimeter. And 10, the director must not be credited. So Lars is one of the founding members here, but he did not create the first one. That was, I believe, his co-creator Thomas Wittenberg.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So he created the second one, which is The Idiots, which I will read the synopsis of if I can find it. With the first Dogma 95 film director, why does it say first on here? Whatever. Opens up a completely new film platform with a mix of home video and documentary styles. The film tells the story of a group of young people who have decided to get to know their inner idiots, and thus not only facing and breaking their outer appearance, but also their inner. I don't think that's a great description, but we'll since we start Celeste.
Is there a good description for what happens in this?
I know. I was about to ask the same thing.
Yeah.
Especially without sounding extremely offensive right out of the gate. I don't know how you describe this.
I feel like that's what the letterbox person who wrote that on TMDB was like. I'm just going to talk about Dogma 95.
I feel like this is interesting. I'm very curious to hear y'all's reaction to this before we jump into like how you think. This was ranked on They Shoot Pictures as the 827th best movie of all time.
What the fuck?
Which absolutely floored me that many critics would put this on their top 10 list.
Yeah, that seems high.
Because it's just a math thing. Like it's that means that like a significant number of critics put this on their top 10.
And it was not Mark Kermode because he apparently booed this movie pretty hard when it came out. So it was not him.
But this is above Memento. This is above. This is right next to Evil Dead 2. This is right next to Y Tu Mama Tambien, the producers from Mel Brooks. Like there are some pretty heavy hitters that this is just kind of nestled into. Funny enough, this is also on They Shoot Zombies, which really makes me question the list.
Wait, really?
Yes. It's the 6,000.
Do you hear that? There's a car going off outside.
No, we don't hear it. No, you're good.
Okay, cool.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. We hear it a little bit, but it's just background effects. This is our Dogma 95. We're only allowed to use sounds that come through naturally. We have
no noise. There will be no noise suppression in Dogma 96 podcast recording.
It's the 6,514th best horror movie of all time. Which I mean, at that point, whatever.
But I am surprised. A pretty broad definition of horror, and that would not have even occurred to me.
We had like a couple from last episode that ended up on there, right? Like
no, you're thinking of Kubrick. It was
it was
Full Metal Jacket was on there.
I still don't know how you call it. Like I'm the same way. I'm like horror is very basic, and I'm just like Full Metal Jacket. Okay.
Yeah. but 827th best movie of all time. I just fundamentally disagree with that. That is an insane take.
I feel like I've been making it seem like I hate it. I actually really liked it, but I don't think I would put it in the top 1,000 films ever made. I know that's of course deeply subjective, but
yeah, sure.
That does seem high. Is all I'll say.
It's just like I can't imagine meeting like even people in film circles who would sit there and say, "Yeah, that's in my top 100." Like I just can't imagine it. I'm just like,
no, top 10.
Fascinating. Oh, they have to have it in top 10.
Top 10 because they just aggregate like a bunch of top 10s.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. Sure. Okay.
I mean, I'll say I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it, so I'll give it that.
No, it's unique. So I guess we'll get a little bit into thoughts. Celeste, so you want to give like your basic thoughts before we start getting into it?
I will say I don't think I can say anything meaningful about this without spoiling it, but in terms of my spoiler-free sort of off the dome take, I was not sure about this in a few different ways up until the very end where it kind of clicked for me what this was trying to say or what it was going for, and then I was like retroactively kind of like, okay, I can get on board with this. I think I think I liked this a lot. And it was kind of, again, really unique in that I was sort of, I didn't have any bearings for like kind of interpreting what I was seeing as it was so, it's like edited like a YouTube video or something. The editing is so frenetic and, there's
Yeah.
boom mics in so many shots and like, there's just a lot here. It's really gross in a lot of places. It's not a pleasant or aesthetically uh I will say that's something that is true about all three of these is I think they look kind of hideous. Like Breaking the Waves is
Hmm.
probably the prettiest looking, but they look ugly.
Hmm.
And I know that that's on purpose. So that's just a thought there. But I think that's the extent of what I can share without sort of discussing the very end and what I think it reveals about the themes.
And just real quick before you go, Chris, that's why I think it's fascinating, and you should really give Europa a chance because I've always said the same thing about his stuff. Like I think I said it last time. He sometimes looks like a TV director, like an old
Hmm.
school TV director. But then you watch something like Europa, and you're like, he absolutely has the capability. So this is
Oh
obviously a
yeah.
purposeful decision.
Yes.
And we'll get into it in Dancers in the Dark too, because there are times he goes away from that specifically in that movie. But like it's such an odd decision because I don't think many directors would choose to do that. Like this is gonna look like shit, and it's
Hmm.
supposed to.
Well, keep rolling, Zach. Why you're going?
What about The Idiots?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So I did not like this film. Not at all. I thought a lot of the stuff they did was unique. I thought there was actually a couple jokes as like off color as they were. I thought they worked really well, and I thought they were funny and make me feel guilty about it, sort of thing. But a lot of at the time, I just kind of felt a little bored. And by the time the reveal comes, which we will talk about, I think if the movie was shorter, I wouldn't have already checked out by the time that happens. And I think that, I just don't know if the movie needs to be nearly 2 hours. I don't feel like there's
Hmm.
enough there to make me feel like it needs to be 2 hours.
Hmm. Yeah, I engaged in my notorious habit of falling asleep halfway through because I'm always trying to squeeze in as many as possible before bed.
Yep,
Um,
yep.
which allows me to have a lot of two-session viewings, which I actually do think is kind of valuable in its own way. So maybe that kind of helped with the pacing and that I could break it up a bit, because it is kind of exhausting and it is a little longer than I think it maybe needs to be.
He's a self-indulgent guy when it comes to that.
All of
I
his
mean,
movies are pretty long. I don't.
yeah,
I'm trying to think if there's like any that, especially after this point in his career, if there are any that are short. I
I
don't
don't think
think so.
so.
I think they're all super long.
The Five Obstructions is you'll be pleasantly happy with that one, or at least it goes quickly. It's a light movie. And then I haven't seen. There's some comedy that he makes that I haven't seen, which we'll get to. Okay, so I think this is one of those movies for me that I understand what he's doing intellectually, and I think it'd be a fun thing to talk about with a group of friends. But I struggle to think why this movie needed to get made.
Hmm.
Um, like the idea of the core kind of thing here with this group, right, is that they're all going through they're all going through something in their life, right? And they come together underneath a very dysfunctional sort of leader who is surprisingly good at galvanizing them to like a common vision. Like there's
Hmm.
some scenes where he's kind of wise in this very uh, weird theology that they've created, or like weird dogma that they've created for their life. But he's got a very clear vision of what's right and what's not right and what's acceptable and not, and like he really sticks to it. Uh, so I and then the character of Karen is a fascinating character, and she's beautifully written, I think, in a very surprising way. Like there's a gentle kind of touch on her, like near the end, where she comes off as very human and very sweet, um, and sort of you feel for her. So that was an unexpected turn, but like I just can't watch this. I just the experience of watching it was just so hard and uncomfortable. I just didn't like the like I you talked about the fact that the R word is used so freely here. I think part of it is probably 1998. Part of it is certainly LVT trying to be provocative.
Mm.
Um, I think, and some of it is, I think, just him getting caught up in this vision of what he wanted this kind of this world to be. But I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of where I'll stop for now. I get it. I think I'm curious to hear how the conversation goes, and I really did not like watching it.
Yeah. I think am I good to maybe at least touch upon the ending?
Let's
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, I there's no real way to talk about this movie otherwise, and we got general thoughts out.
Okay.
Spoiler
So,
warning for here on out.
yeah. So I think I was of two minds about it watching it throughout, where I'm like, man, this is deeply unpleasant and this is just so deeply offensive and like this is just like the worst, And then until it's at the very end that I think it becomes very clear that we're supposed to agree with the filmmakers here that these people fucking suck. Like they're just the
yeah,
worst. Like,
yeah.
and so I was watching this whole thing like this is supposed to be a comedy and I'm not laughing at all. And not even because I'm like, oh, oh, that was too offensive. I'm not allowed to laugh at that. I just like it just didn't work for me on that level, like even a
Yeah.
single time. So I'm like,
Hmm,
I'm not
hmm.
really sure what I'm supposed to be getting out of this. Like I'm not laughing. I think it's kind of gross. Like I think this is sort of interesting and like this kind of idea that's being presented of like um it's hard to gauge like what it is you're supposed to be getting out of it until the very end when you realize that like so like what happens towards the end is like the leader of the group is sort of like okay, so you guys are obviously not in it to win it or whatever, like you only want to engage in this project, and in case that hasn't been made clear, like what they're doing is pretending to have a mental disability such that they can get away with like all these social faux pas and just like sort of confront people on their attitudes towards people with mental disability. Like it's all a kind of pseudo intellectual excuse to behave badly in public,
Yep,
Just a prank,
exactly.
bro.
Yeah,
Yeah, that kind
exactly.
of thing. Um and so they're doing it in like the safety of this like home that they're just essentially squatting in because the leader is supposed to be selling it. Um,
Right.
at the end, he's kind of like, y'all are full of shit. Y'all are just doing this as like a little exercise. Go do it where it matters. Like, go do this around your family or around your work.
Uh-huh.
And one by one, they're like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. Like, I can't actually do that
Right.
until you see this like actually taken again. He seems to be a big fan of like taking this to its logical end. Like, let's
Yeah.
really, really explore this idea till it hurts, right?
Yeah.
And she goes where she has ostensibly like left her husband after their son dies and leaves him hanging high and dry at the funeral without a word. Clearly just like an escape from like this traumatic experience she's had. And like
That's right.
in maybe the worst possible moment you could do this, and I also don't want to use the word that they used to describe like acting out in this way. Um like like she confronts her, I guess now ex-husband, I'm not really sure, and doesn't even say anything, and then like starts spitting up her cake and just being gross, and like it's obvious even to the other person in on it, like this is too much. We have to stop. Like, let's
Right.
go.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I think it kind of shows us like, hey, like this thing that they're doing can only exist in the context of like the peak of absolute privilege. Like these people
Yes.
don't have a mental disability. These people are able to up and leave their jobs and their families to have this kind of little like pseudo philosophical exercise where they can just be terrible people and have group sex and be gross and like just essentially check out of society for a bit. You can't do that unless you have like an immense amount of privilege, right?
That's right.
And they're kind of using marginalized identities or actual like oppression as like a kind of like an exercise in tourism, you know? and
Mm,
they're kind
mm,
of
mm,
seeing
mm.
it as like a privilege to like not have to engage in the niceties of society, but really all they're doing is being like the worst people. Like, and so I think it's
So,
kind of like this long form condemnation on this kind of I mean, I think I could say white because I mean they're all white, and it's a very specifically white form of like pseudo intellectual kind of
100%.
intelligentsia that
I think
sort
I'm
of
with you on that.
yeah that sort of like thinks it can cosplay as like
Mhm.
actual marginalized identities or like just kind of goes in and out of those things, but like it doesn't actually have to live with they don't actually have to live with the consequences of that behavior
That's
or
right.
like the marginalization that comes with actually having that identity.
Right.
Um, okay, I think I have once again monopolized the conversation enough, and maybe I'll hit the pause button there.
No, it's an interesting perspective that you just had. I get it. I guess this is a big deal for me, and I know uh, Zach's been really annoyed at me a couple times when I've like been dogmatic on this point on a movie he's liked. But like for me, I just what I you've given me a slightly different take on the movie, which I like. But the but why make this movie? Like for Breaking the Waves, I think it became obvious that he's sort of having some kind of a critique on religion or exposing religion or dogmatic, theology or whatever, right? Dancer in the Dark, we're certainly going to have a lot to talk about as why make that movie. But I'm still struggling to latch on to why this film needs to be here. Why this film? What does it do?
Yeah, it
Like what?
feels almost like it's a skewering of like a very specific type of person that he may almost have like personal experience with, like
Oh,
coming
that's
from
interesting.
he strikes me as somebody who comes from a sort of intellectual background and probably went to college and all this other stuff. And like this
Hmm.
idea of people who want to like intellectualize other people's experiences and pretend as though they know what that's like. It kind of feels like he's skewering a very specific kind of obnoxious intellectual. But I also kind of
That's
agree. It also does fundamentally a little bit feel like an excuse to just be really gross and offensive and push buttons in a way that isn't particularly thoughtful, and I kind of go back and forth on that, especially, you know, most of the way watching it the first time and until I had a moment to digest it. I was just like, this just kind of feels like you are making fun of these people, but you actually just want to explore this idea, and this
right,
is your
right.
excuse to do it.
Yeah, and it
That's
almost feels like what when people criticize him who haven't seen a lot of his stuff kind of view him as like this is the type of film he makes. And I mean he's provocative in almost everything,
Mm.
but there's usually like a purpose behind it,
abs
like at least the not
absolutely
identifiable one. And that's really the what you latch on to. Like we sat there and had like an hour long conversation on the why do that in Breaking the Waves. I don't have enough to say to why he would what he's trying to get out of this, because I at least want to give him the benefit of the doubt that there's something there. I just don't know what it is.
yeah. And it would be ironic of all the people to make, just building on what you're saying, Zach, it would be of all the people to make a critique on intellectualism, it would be ironic coming from him.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
because
I mean,
he just seems to be like a public performer and like get caught on ideals, right? Like he was saying like recently he got in trouble for saying, we have to think about Russian fallen soldiers too. And he was like, no, of course I support Ukraine. I'm just saying all lives matter, basically. Right? You're like, dude, yeah, but come
and it,
on, man.
and it feels like the definition, like to use the words he did, like he's trolling with people, and you're just
Mhm.
like
Exactly.
he likes it. He enjoys things like that. It's like
Yeah,
when he made those Hitler comments in Germany. It's
yeah.
like the dude just wanted to, just wanted to fuck with people.
Hmm.
Like it's what he
Yeah.
Exactly.
enjoys.
There's a
Right.
fun clip watching the people around him like descend into real horror in real time as he's speaking.
It's at Cannes, right? Or
Yeah.
isn't it? Wasn't it before Cannes Festival, I think? Oh my
Yeah.
God. And then all of his like the cast members of
Uh-huh.
was it Melancholy or whatever it
Yep.
was,
You can
they
just
were
see
all
their
like, no,
faces.
He's not like that. Oh
Mm,
man. Anyways, but yeah, I 19, 20-year-old me, I think would have I like to push buttons at that time. I was very interested in films that like challenged things that other people didn't want to talk about and wouldn't go. I think I would have liked this film a lot.
mhm,
And as just having, I think like as I hate to say this, I hate to sound like old, but as I've gotten older, if you're gonna make a movie like this, I just want there to be something behind it other than just an intellectual exercise. Um, because if I have a younger, I mean, I don't, but if I have a younger brother that has trisomy 21, I don't think I like this movie,
mhm,
right? Or if I have like, somebody in my family with like severe bipolar disorder or something, I don't think that this is a good experience watching this, whatever the
mhm.
point he's trying to make. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I mean, I do land on thinking that he is satirizing this kind of insensitive navel gazing that these characters are engaging in. But I also think
Mhm.
that satire is a really, really difficult tightrope to balance
Yeah,
between satirizing something and also just being that thing. And I
yeah.
think that we kind of have a bit of both. And to me, at least, I think it's clear that the intention was to skewer this attitude, but it also feels as though he's indulging in it a little bit throughout the film, and it's hard to parse that out sometimes.
Like, yeah, we're already
This is
here. I might as well get a couple jokes I thought of out of the way,
no, totally, totally.
Hmm.
But this is what he does, which is funny because it's also what I love about him, just not necessarily here, is like he lets his mind go. Sorry, he puts on film where the mind goes sometimes, right?
Hmm.
Like he's not scared of like putting on film where sometimes the mind goes. Like that whole thing, like the whole meme about like the dark thoughts one or like the quiet thoughts one or whatever. Like
The intrusive thoughts put on film.
intrusive. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. Like he does that, which I like. It's interesting to think about and explore and talk about and all that stuff. But I don't know. It was a little bit too much for me.
And I
Um,
guess it's like the only time, like you kind of brought it up, that, probably a reason for a lot of the language is when it takes place in the late 90s. And I mean, a lot of his films can be put into, could you get away with that quite today? And this is one I feel specifically would be really, really difficult to make outside of 1998.
Yeah,
no,
you know, it would because I think that the sort of bait and switch doesn't work as well if you're in a society that has more largely decided that using these slurs is not okay. Because I think a lot of people in the audience might be with them until they see how it plays out in a context that like quote unquote matters, right?
hmm
But like I think that and again, maybe I'm giving him too much credit. Maybe it really is just playing it straight because he thinks this kind of thing is funny. But I really do think that we're meant to see these like absolute slime ball pieces of shit like using these slurs, and it's meant to indicate to us that they don't actually see the humanity and the people that they're cosplaying.
mm,
And you kind of, I think this is, you kind of made me think about this. I think about somebody just somehow running across this movie with having no context of who he is as a filmmaker. We talk about, that he seems very empathetic through his films and things he tries to
hmm
discuss. I would not get that from this film. I would just have to
Mm,
assume if I
hmm.
saw this blind from everything else that he is indulging in it or making fun of what
Hmm.
he shouldn't be making fun of. And I think that's the tough part about it. It's hard to get the
You know,
reading out of context.
I think there's a really interesting scene in it where the what is it like the neighborhood board member or whatever essentially offers to like pay them to leave because they don't
Yeah.
yeah,
want to be confronted with that.
yeah,
Um, I think that's an interesting scene in a few ways, in that it kind of it it just seems to be sort of exposing sort of upper middle class or upper class
yes,
sort of white like mm,
like mores, right? Like
yeah, yeah,
attitudes
yeah, yeah,
towards.
yeah. They are breaking up like the image that this neighborhood needs to convey of like
Yeah,
proper society, and they're being
yeah,
paid to like make the problem go away, you
right.
know? And so it succeeds in one skewering that type of attitude while also kind of almost justifying their experiment because it's like it
Mhm.
does succeed in exposing this. And so again, yeah, it kind of it walks that line in between like um criticizing this sort of philosophical project while also showing
Indulging
how
in
it
it.
could be useful,
Oh, yeah, yeah. Right, right, right.
and indulging in it. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like there's not too much else to say. I think it's outside of going through his filmography. I don't know that I could recommend this as something that people would like have to see. Like I would want people to see Breaking the Waves. I would be interested to see people's reaction to this, but
This is
I don't
not
know.
one I would recommend to other people, I don't think.
No, can you imagine putting this on your top 10 list and being like, "Oh man, I saw the most badass film yesterday."
But
Like,
Well,
with
okay,
all
it
of those
might be
people,
something I'd recommend to someone with a lot of caveats if I know them well. But just casually, I'm not going to be like, "Yo, you should check this out." And then they'll be like, "Are you a person I can be safe around?"
you know what I appreciate, like, a critic, the numerous critics who had this on their top 10 who didn't sit there and second guess, like, how will I be perceived if I have this on my top 10? Screw it, gonna turn
yeah,
it in anyway and
Yeah.
just go for
yeah,
it.
true, true. No, we have the one thing I'll say, Celeste, kind of building on what you just said, as adults, people, we have a inherent, or maybe American culturally, maybe Danish culturally, if this is a thing, there is an inherent discomfort around people that are otherly abled, right, or differently abled.
Mhm.
And I think that is one interesting thing that comes out of this movie is like he just puts it in your face for 2 hours and is like, just deal with it. Like I'm gonna make a whole movie of just people like that are acting this way, and it's just gonna make you squirm.
Mhm.
And in that sort of pure form of like provocateur kind of rebellion, I can dig it because I I get that. Um, there's something in art of just like making people uncomfortable for the sake of saying like, no, no, you're gonna sit through this with me. Like,
Yeah.
um, and I can kind of get behind that because I think it does elicit an emotion, even if that emotion is disdain for the man making it. Like he's successful in like pulling something out that most movies don't pull out. So I can certainly give him that.
Yeah, I have one last thought before we move on, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
I will say that something I respect a lot about what I've seen of really all of his films, except I think the next one, that I've seen anyway, is that, well, one, there's a lot of nudity in his films, which is something that I am in support of, but also like I think it's telling when a filmmaker will have tons of nudity in their films, but it's only attractive women, you know?
Yeah, right.
And he is not afraid to put like unconventionally attractive, conventionally unattractive bodies like on full display. And like there's a lot of
Hmm.
equal opportunity nudity in his films. Like
Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
ton of full frontal male nudity in
yeah,
unflattering angles and positions. And
yeah.
I think that that's like I don't know. It might seem like a bit or a meme or something, but I actually do think that that's genuinely important to kind of like normalize um, nudity and the human body from like all kinds of angles and from both or from multiple genders or from men as well, because um, it kind of desexualizes it in a lot of contexts, but it also is sexual in a lot of contexts, but it is
Right.
including the male body in that experience. And I think that that's important to fight against like female objectification. And I
Mhm.
don't think the solution is no nudity. I think its solution is more from both.
Yeah. And Stouffer, for what it's worth, is extremely well endowed. If I was him, I would be very proud to
hmm
be naked on screen. Because
hmm
holy cow, the guy
Yeah, I
is
was
like,
like, whoa, okay.
I
But
was,
apparently the foes is bigger, so we got to keep that in mind.
I sometimes I wonder if like somebody made that up, and he just has decided not to say anything
No, I think
about
there
it.
is somebody actually pointed out a video that he did before he became an actor. It was like some performance thing. It seems to be true,
Well,
apparently. But I would totally, if I was him and it wasn't, I'd
there
be
you
like,
go.
no, I'm gonna just stay silent as long as I can.
Well, I will be Googling Defoe dong after this podcast is over, just out
We'll
of
put it in the
curiosity.
link in the description.
Yeah. Willem's
But no,
Defoe in the show notes.
Williams Defoe. But Celeste, I do think what you say, despite us being juvenile about it after you said it, is important. I agree with you, and I like the fact, there's this whole thing about like men don't really have like depression normalized on screen unless it's
Hmm.
presented as something that's very weak, right? Or
Hmm.
like there's a lot of stuff that men just don't have a history of sort of being of like fair depiction on screen, and therefore because it's not part of pop culture, therefore it doesn't exist, right?
Hmm.
And so I do like that is a personal. I guess I'll join you in that. uh, that's something that I want to see more of and always champion. I've kind of forgot to do it here, despite the all body types thing, which is also interesting and good. It is, yeah, men are portrayed very equally here, and it's like ugly sex. When the sex does
Hmm.
happen, it's not like this glamorous. It's just
Hmm.
like horny people getting in a room and fucking,
Hmm.
and like it's not portrayed as necessarily glamorous. It just sort of happens because that's part of their um, how do you say that without saying the any of the words that they use? That's part of what they're trying to do with their troupe. It's
Hmm.
just to be like, crazy and chaotic and impulsive and all these things. So
Yeah. I mean, and also like even without the kind of ugly quote unquote context surrounding it, like in Breaking the Waves, I think Skarsgård's character spends more time nude on screen than what's her name?
yeah, that's
Watson's
true.
character. I mean, if anything, it's very close, you know. I don't know. It maybe it's not as important as I'm making it out to be, but kind of like balancing out the decades of kind of this sort of thing going one way, where women are expected to be sexualized and objectified on screen, which like, there are ways to do that that I think are okay. Like I think that like having women be sexual on screen is generally a good thing. Um, but it's just you can tell when it's only going one way, and
Yep.
it's like clear that, the maybe a filmmaker is like, oh, there's nothing wrong with the human body. I just want to portray it. It's like, okay, well then why is the man covered up in this scene?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yep.
just it's a pet peeve of mine, and I appreciate it when it's clear that there's equal opportunity sexualization going on.
Decent film. A plus for Dong.
That's right. D for
Uh,
dong.
T T for Dong. Sorry to undermine everything you just said that was very mature. But I do agree with you. Get us out of here. Speaking of D for Dong, that's not a
D
good
for
transition.
dancer.
That's not a good transition to Dancer in the Dark. Holy hell,
All right,
sorry.
guys, we got to be mature for Dancer in the Dark. There's too much to go on. All right, so for Dancer in the Dark, we are going to talk about Selma, a Czech immigrant on the verge of blindness, struggles to make ends meet for herself and her son, who has inherited the same genetic disorder and will suffer the same fate without an expensive operation. When life gets too difficult, Selma learns to cope through her love of musicals, escaping life's troubles, even just for a moment by dreaming up little numbers of rhythmic beats to her surroundings. All right, if this is below the idiots, I am going to rage just a little bit. So tell me it's not in the 800s.
No, this is a beloved movie. Not quite as much as Breaking the Waves, but it is 721.
Mm.
It is above The Idiots.
I do wonder if it's like difficulty of access to it has made it a little bit harder to
Yeah.
like move up and down because for anyone who doesn't know, we've been referencing a lot of the Curzon set. This is not included. They did not put this film in there, so
Yeah,
they had to go for other ways to watch it.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's been kind of ignored in terms of like capitalizing off of it for what I think are probably very good reasons, but it does mean you have to kind of work a little harder to see it.
yeah. And those other reasons are a shame
Hmm.
because this is a hell of a movie.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if we start with the controversy and then get into the movie. Is that the best way to do it and just talk about separation of art versus artist? Um,
It's a tough one. I'm not really sure. They kind of intersect a lot, you know? Maybe it's best to just kind of get general thoughts on the film out of the way first, and then as
yeah,
it makes sense, we can incorporate the
sure.
unsavory behind the scenes.
Let's do it. Zach, I don't think you've gone first yet. What did you think of Dancer in the Dark?
Oh, I like loved it way more than I expected to. In all honesty,
Yeah.
I kind of figured I would like it, but I'm as much as I like musicals, the idea of an LVT musical intrigues me and scares me. So um, I was very pleasantly surprised. I don't get emotional during a lot of films anymore. I guess it's the part of being desensitized, but I did for this. It was a very moving film. Yeah, it's a very I wouldn't be surprised if this stays as my favorite of his, but I'll be curious as we continue to go on. But as of right now, it's the favorite one we've watched.
Yeah. Yeah. Celeste.
Um, so maybe I don't know. I am a certified yapper, so I can probably talk about it a lot, but I do think that maybe this is the one that I have the least to say about, even though it is by far my favorite. Um, and I think it is also easily my favorite of his films that I've seen, period. Although I gotta say, like, I think where the credit is due and like how much of this film that I love, like kind of like begins and ends with Bjork. Like her
Yeah.
performance is so singular and so all-encompassing, and her music is so integral to my enjoyment of this film and the way that it has stayed in my mind since then. Like I've had the soundtrack pretty much on repeat since I watched it. It's
Yeah.
just so good. Um,
Yeah.
and as a person who's been a fan of Bjork for a long time, that pre-existing relationship I have with her art and my admiration for her as a person is kind of both been why I want to see it and why I don't.
Okay.
Because as we've kind of alleged, she has been pretty explicit that Lars von Trier was like a real piece of shit to her on the set of this and like
Hmm.
was sexually harassing her pretty much nonstop and lied about her and made her out to be like she was a problem to work with when really she just rejected his advances and all this other stuff that it seems was an open secret but was swept under the rug and was sort of
Hmm.
encouraged by the other people on set. It makes it very difficult to have a unabashedly like positive relationship with this film, when you know what had to or what maybe probably didn't have to happen, but what did happen in order to create it.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I didn't know any of this, obviously, when I saw it in theaters. I saw it,
Mm.
it came out in 2000. I saw it in theaters in 2000 when I was in college. I was a fan of Radiohead and I was a fan of Björk. And the idea of them kind of combining to make music together for this movie was something that
Hmm.
was very exciting. So I knew I was going to like it kind of going in. Um, what I wasn't expecting was to have my heart absolutely ripped out of my chest. So this movie stayed with me. I mean, I vividly remember this movie for 24 years, and there's
Hmm.
not a lot that I remember that well. Um, some of the scenes, the way that he uses music here, I don't think I've ever seen before, because he's using music as her escaping from her horrible life that's just getting worse, but she's doing her best to like push through, right? And
Hmm.
she uses music to like come to sort of some center, and peace with the way that her life is going. And it's disturbing to know what's transpired between her and Lars von Trier on the set. And obviously his story is different in the sense that, of course, like he's gonna defend saying it didn't happen. And yeah, it's hard to know precisely what went down. It's obvious they hate each other a lot, and obviously it's generally better to believe the woman who's not nudged or budged at all from her claims and has doubled down when she's pressed. So I hate that that is happened to her, and I don't know the whole story, and it sucks. But when she belts out notes of, she has such a powerful, unique voice.
Mhm.
It's like she sings from like her stomach or soul or something. Like she sings from like a different place than most people sing from in a musical. And there's just this like intense pain in her joy in when she's singing. And I don't know how she does it. Um,
Yeah.
and
Um,
I was like open crying when I was watching this last night. It's just I just it's rare that music kind of moves me like this.
yeah.
Um,
I think it's a testament to how sorry, I just got a message. I was reading it for a second. It's a testament to how unique her approach to singing and composition is. Like,
yeah.
my partner pointed this out when we were watching it, but like whenever the side characters start singing too, it feels like really wrong, or it doesn't really work. Like
Mm-mm,
it just is like
mm-mm,
they sound bad, you know?
mm-mm.
And it's not just that they may or may not be professional singers. It's just like a normal person attempting to sing the way Bjork does doesn't sound right, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Um, I, Zach, I don't know. I'm curious. You said you like musicals, and I know that I haven't heard this side of you too much. Um, I'm trying to think of the last musical that you even talked about. So what, what do you happen to like a lot of musicals?
Yeah, I would say that overall I'm a musical fan. I
Oh, okay.
enjoy
I
them
didn't
a
know.
lot more in person. Typically,
Yeah, yeah.
usually that makes sense. You usually like them more. Cats is complete dog shit on film, but you know what? It's not too bad when you're there with the energy. I'm
Yeah.
kidding. It's really terrible when you're there with the energy too, but it's less terrible. Um, but no, I do like musicals. I have a lot of issues with them in the sense that I can be very picky about them. Like that was one of the things I was worried about with this one. I was like, you're dealing with somebody who does not necessarily have a background in writing a musical. Um, but I will say that I liked his approach because I think one thing that happens when you see name any TV show that's done their musical episode, they have this need to cram and cram and cram with musical numbers. And the first musical number does not come into what, like 40, 45 minutes into the film, like to the point where
Absolutely.
you almost forget it's a musical. And they set it up in such a natural and set up way where they are getting you ready for, hey, this is going to turn into a musical, but we promise it makes sense. Like
Uh-huh.
we're this is going to be the emotional core of the film. And it's incredibly impressive. I don't know if it's just from somebody who's either extremely aware and very confident in their ability to write a musical, or it's just somebody who's very outside of it saying, I'm just going to do it my own way, or what it is. But whatever it was, it worked very well.
Well, I think what probably helped, Bjork started out as a jazz singer.
Mhm.
Like she's her early albums when she was sort of just coming up are like pretty much not, she doesn't do anything straight jazz, but I mean it's she's a jazz singer, and like has always had this very unique way of kind of approaching composition. But um, you know, she's been composing music since she was, I don't even know, very young.
I think
So
her debut album came out when she was like 13,
that's wild. That's wild.
maybe even 12.
Um,
I hope I'm not making that up.
that's wild. And then obviously Tom, is it Tom York? I always forget the guy's last name,
Hmm. Tom
but the
York.
guy from Radiohead, Tom York, right? Yeah. I mean, he's obviously very good at compose. A lot of Radiohead albums are sort of like themed albums. You know, like they have a um, they they're written in the way that a classical piece would be written or something. Like they have a story told like throughout the album. So I
Mhm.
don't think it's in that sense. I don't know that it's, you know. And one of the things. Oh, sorry. And the other thing that I thought was interesting on this 20-year-old DVD that I had, they had a documentary about the dance scenes and the choreography. They hired a very accomplished choreographer to produce the dancing numbers, and they did a technique. They created a technique for the film, where they had 100 cameras filming every dance scene,
Wow.
and they had the choreographer place the cameras. So you get these sort of alien angles for a musical that don't quite make sense. Like they're like underneath the dancers, or they're up like at a weird angle, or you don't get a lot of the straight sort of typical angles that you would get in a musical. And that's I guess I learned from this documentary very much by design. Um, so you have this. It's interesting because it's shot on most of it's shot on 16 millimeter, if not all of it, right? And the other
I
thing
think
they
it's
talk about,
primarily shot on video, and then
or video.
maybe some of it is 16.
Some of it definitely gets a little bit, during the musical
Mm-hmm.
numbers, it's more cinematic. It's
Mm-hmm.
I think the aspect ratio and everything changes
Yeah.
during those
So
moments.
so not to geek out, but this is the complicated thing about talking about this with the now that we know so much about how deeply unpleasant it was for Bjork, because there's so many interesting and like fascinating things about the movie. So they created a lens for the movie so that they could make a 16 millimeter camera into widescreen. So they
Hmm.
actually stretched, they essentially, like, they show it in this doc, and it looks like a fisheye lens, but they did it in such a way that if you were to film it, so when they did like dailies, everybody's head was stretched out. So they didn't actually see a normal image. Like basically it was stretched like tall. And they did it that way so that when it was compressed into a 35 millimeter reel and lens to display on a theater screen, it would compress that image and make it flat and project it properly on 30 like a 35 millimeter screen. So there's all this amazing technical stuff that went in to make this film that looks so simple, um, which is just another layer to it that I loved learning about, because it didn't feel like much happened by accident, but there was actually a ton of work that went into making it sort of look and feel the way that it did. Anyways, sorry, not to go off on that tangent. I was
No, it's
watching
really
this
interesting.
documentary, right? I was watching it. It was like 2 in the morning or something, and I was watching it, or whatever, 1 in the morning, something like that. And I just wanted to put it on just to kind of like see, learn a little bit. And then I just like kept watching this documentary because I was like, wait, what? And then he did what? Um, but anyways, technical stuff aside, even if the movie was not made well technically, which it is, the story is what like hooks me. So, do y'all think it's worth spending like, I don't know, 10 seconds or so just to kind of walk through? I mean, this, I know you kind of did the overview briefly, Zach, but like Bjork essentially lives with this family, right? Like in her, like in a sort of like an adjoining house, like maybe a mother-in-law house kind of thing that they've built on their property, but it's like a trailer, I think, right? Or it's this very small house, anyways, that's on their property. She lives with her son. There's no mention of the father anywhere, I don't think, right? I don't think there's any mention
Not of yeah,
Not
not of
that I can
hers.
recall. Yeah.
of well, her father,
Yeah,
but
her
also
father, but
of
not of his. Yeah.
not of his, right? Yeah. Um, and then as the film progresses, the husband of the, I guess like the homeowner, when she lives on his property, he really like likes her, and the husband and wife both really like her. She's a very naturally like a very sweet person. She's a very kind person, and you start to see him basically start to take advantage of that relationship when he's having his own struggles, and then it just
Mhm.
sort of falls off this really tragic cliff very quickly. And it's interesting because I was wondering where they were going to go with 2.5 hours, because I feel like the bulk of the plot happens in the first like hour, and there's an hour and a half left after like this. It really gets crazy with David Morse's character. So then like there's this whole other side of what happens after. I mean, I guess it's hard to talk about without spoilers, but should we just? I mean, you kind of have to talk about what happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
I do want to note before we do that, when you brought up David Morse. So I remember watching the movie and I was like, that he helps her out so much. It's like helping with the bike and everything else. And I'm like, man, I think this is the first time I've seen David Morse not play a complete asshole in something.
Wait, sorry, that's Peter Stormare. Are you talking
No,
about
no, no, the guy,
the
the
cop?
police officer. No, no, that guy.
Oh, okay, okay. Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
because he
okay,
does
okay.
help her with other stuff, like when she doesn't want to ride with Jeff and stuff like that. And I'm like, man,
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
playing such a nice guy. I'm like, this is so weird for him. And then I'm like, oh, never mind. Well, that's ruined. Thanks.
Mhm.
No, totally.
But yeah, we're gonna go ahead and get into spoilers. All of us recommend it from the sound of it, so go watch it, and we'll get to the conclusion of what we're watching next if you want to watch it before you listen to the rest. So you're clear.
Fuck, it's just heartbreaking. Like, as I don't, the only thing I can't quite comprehend about his character, and maybe y'all can help me here, is like he sees her in like this very vulnerable position, and like all he can think about is this cash to save himself that she's built up for her son who needs like an eye surgery. And I just can't quite comprehend that level of like evil, I
I
guess.
think it's because he's because he says it repeatedly. He's like, it's just for a month. But we know we've all lent people money before. We know how this probably turns out. It's not just a month.
Right,
She'll never
right,
see that money again if he borrows it.
right.
Doesn't mean he doesn't believe it in some way or he hasn't deluded himself. I'm thinking it really will just be a month. I think that's how people kind of convince themselves to do evil acts. Like it's not evil. It's fine. It's gonna work
Yeah.
out. She'll get I'll get what I want. She'll get what she wants. We're good.
So
Yeah,
I have a lot of thoughts about his character
please,
specifically.
please.
First of all, I think that the unambiguous message of the film is don't trust cops. Um, but further, more specifically, I think that his character specifically really shows just how violent the construction of toxic masculinity can get when it is enforced. Like his construction of his own masculinity and his own identity as it relates to being a provider for his wife is more important than like anything else. Like if he is unable, like if he has to admit that he has lost this money and he is unable to continue to provide for her in these extravagant ways, like his status as a husband and as a man is like shattered. And in his mind, like he has nothing else to offer
Mm,
because he has
mm.
entirely constructed himself as like a provider. And
And
so
it's, no, go ahead.
I guess just without that, like he is willing to do anything to keep up that facade.
Because
And
he
so it doesn't
inherits the
really
money, right?
matter. Yeah, it doesn't even really matter like what he has to do or if it's even true or if it even makes sense. Like as long as his wife is under the impression that he can continue to provide, like that's kind of it.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
But you were saying something and I think I interrupted you.
No, no, I definitely interrupted you. I was just thinking about this idea of the inheritance that he got. He never really
Hmm.
earned it to begin with.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah. Maybe there's a certain shame in the fact that he didn't even earn it to begin with, and now he has constructed his entire identity on something that he didn't even earn. And when that's taken away, he has to kind of confront that, you know?
Not
And
not earned and then not kept. Sorry, go ahead, Sam.
Hmm.
no, I was just gonna say, and I think part of someone who could be in this situation could easily delude themselves by things like, we bought your son a bike. We've done
Yep.
this and that for you. We don't raise your rent, even though she offers to pay more in rent to
Which is
for his
insane.
benefit. For his benefit, she will willing to pay more if
Hmm.
she tries to find this compromise, and he's just not able or unwilling to take that compromise.
Hmm.
Well, I think he's unable in that instance because his wife is the one who's like, "That's silly. We have plenty of money," you know? To accept that help would to be admitting that you need it, you know?
Right.
It's interesting because there's like two layers of problems, right? There's sort of like problems of, let's just call it the privileged, if you want to say it that way, where they're spending more than their means, right?
Hmm.
And he's not able for a variety of reasons. I think toxic masculinity is a great way to phrase it, but he's not able to confront his wife and just have an honest conversation about their finances.
Yeah.
So that's one level of stress. But then there's this whole other level of stress, which is like Bjork is going blind, and she's like, and Catherine Deneuve is basically her guardian angel, helping her get through life. And
Until she's
she's
not.
trying until she's not. But like, I get it though, right? She's just
Hmm.
exhausted. Like,
Yeah, it's
anyways,
because like Selma as a character is, for good reasons, incredibly principled and incredibly stubborn
so
Yep.
to her
stubborn.
own detriment
Yep.
throughout the
Yes.
film.
That touches
Yeah.
on, I think, one of the primary themes of the film. But I think Chris, you were on a track somewhere. So.
No, I don't mind. This is a fluid conversation. It's just so heartbreaking to see somebody who is, in her mind, she just wants one thing. And like she is hurting herself by like she doesn't understand that people would help her more if she opened up. So she's
Hmm.
creating this world where she has to do it all. And and then at the same time there's this other pain of like we've kind of in this middle class and we can't lose it. And they just come together and I don't
Hmm.
know. It's hard to watch. But what were you saying? One of the themes.
This kind of idea of like principles to a fault
Hmm.
or like
Hmm.
misapplied, you know? Like she does have this kind of, it's really like it's kind of ironic because she's accused of being like this giant communist, but it's very much this like American idea of like self-sustainability or like,
Yeah.
you know, powering through any and all obstacles because like as long as you work hard enough, you can overcome it, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and also like there was a feeling in the room. I watched this with with both my partners and a friend, so there's a group of us watching it, and there was just this feeling when she refused to reveal his secret even on the stand, even as it like completely makes her story not make any sense, you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
This kind of idea, I don't know, I haven't quite put my finger on exactly what we're diagnosing as a problem here, but maybe like keeping secrets as like a problematic thing to do to a certain extent, or like I don't know, like this kind of
And well,
you
she
know.
offered her
What?
secret in trade. So it
Hmm.
was like, he told her, he like opened his heart up and he felt so bad about it. And
Hmm.
then she's like, look, I'll tell you this because, you know, we'll make it even. And he kept his word in the sense that he never told her son that he was going blind.
Hmm.
And it's almost like that principle is just there. And it's just that
Yeah.
refusal. He's dead. It doesn't matter. Her life is going to be forfeit in the same way his was if
Hmm.
she doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
She believes at her core that if Gene, her son, finds out that he's gonna go blind, the surgery won't be as effective, and therefore her entire life has been meaningless, right?
Yeah.
'Cause she there's this interesting line at the end where I think Jeff asks her, "Why did you have a kid?" And
He
she's like, "I
did.
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
wanted to hold a baby," right? And you're like, damn. So she's basically, she had like that moment, and then she's just been guilty for 15
Yeah.
years. Oh,
Yeah.
like
I
what a
said I
weight,
wouldn't have a
right?
lot to say. I lied, of course. There's a lot of interesting things going on here.
Yeah.
It's like there's a sense of shame in her character too, you know, like where she
Yes.
just at all costs cannot let her son know what she has afflicted him with,
Yeah.
essentially. There's this shame surrounding disability, and there's this shame surrounding like I probably shouldn't have had this kid at all. And yet because of perceived selfishness or what have you, like I did it anyway. And I'm like working my whole life to atone for that. I don't know. She's
Hmm.
just kind of again, it's like this self-sustainability, but also like this sort of
It's a
this in
self-sacrifice
it.
too. Like
Yeah, it is.
yeah, she's
But it's
accepted that this is her life, for better or
Yeah.
worse. This is it.
Hmm.
this kind of inability to grapple with why she's ashamed of these things or like have
Yeah.
this, maybe that comes back to honest communication and like the ways that these characters will die to avoid that, you know? It's kind of like the central theme of like, hey, maybe it's chill to like communicate with the people you care about when you're going through a tough time, you know?
And now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, her and David Morse's character, I think his name was Bill, they're essentially going through the same arc about their secret, but we because of the context, we see Bill as an asshole, but we understand her. But it is interesting that they
Mm-hmm.
parallel or mirror each other quite a bit as they go
Mm-hmm.
through it. Because he asked her
Yeah.
to kill him because he would much rather be dead than
Mm-hmm.
deal with this.
Yeah.
And in the same way, she would rather her son not know. She'll die to make sure he doesn't know.
Hmm.
And it's an interesting parallel that they're going through the same thing, but the way we attach ourselves is just 100% different to it.
Yeah.
There's so I have a Czech grandma. Well, had she died a few years back. She lived a very long and happy life. She was 101. Um, and there it's interesting that he made Björk Czech because I don't know if he knows some Czech people or if he has that in his background, but he pretty accurately portrayed a Czech immigrant grandma or mother. Like there was it was interesting watching this because we called her Grandma Joe. Her name was Marion, but we called her Grandma Joe. And there was a lot of parallels in the stubbornness that Bjork had and to what I saw in my grandma as well. Um, she had a happy like end of life, let's say, like the last quarter, the last act of her life was very happy, but she had an extremely traumatic life with her husband who was a monster, and raised 5 kids with this guy, and every single one of her kids has severe PTSD and has all dealt with it in their own way, and when he died, she called him a saint, and the kids were like, "Huh?" Like, what? Like, she just kind of like it's kind of a tie into this maybe breaking the waves even a little bit, but it's like
Mm-hmm.
this old school kind of like your husband, you just sacrifice everything for the husband and he's right. And um if we would have had modern parlance for I guess my grandpa, we probably there's a very high chance he was autistic on the autism spectrum. But in the 40s and 50s, there wasn't really like a thing for
Mm-hmm.
that. So you just sort of dealt with it, and he didn't deal with it well. But um, anyways, not to get too much into my own family's history, but other than just to say, I recognized a lot of the traits in Bjork, and I thought it was interesting that Von Trier was able to so accurately portray a Czech mom who was an immigrant,
Mm-hmm.
who would absolutely just deny herself. Like she just denied her everything. It didn't her like relationship with this world, like kind of at an ephemeral level, was just not important.
And she reaffirms that too, because she is given that opportunity to get her stay of execution
Hmm.
and use the money that would
Hmm.
have went to that surgery to save herself, or at least have a chance to not be sentenced to death. Whether or not that just be commuted or whatever, we don't know, but
Mm-hmm.
she still chooses not to do it. So she reaffirms it. She makes the sacrifice literally twice for the same result, just to make sure you understand that she is really, really, really understands the decision she has made.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think, I was doing a little bit of reading in the 5 minutes I had in between finishing the film and talking with you all. But I saw that, these three films are part of a trilogy called like the Golden Heart trilogy, which kind of play upon this old folk tale of like sacrifice. And I see that
Mm.
thematic through line in Breaking the Waves in here. I don't know how much I see it in The Idiots really at all. Um, but yeah, I think that sacrifice like as folly or as kind of like not as romantic a result as perhaps stories and religion have led us to believe, Like you see her fate and it's like just awful and it's just preventable and it I mean he gets his surgery, but at what cost, Would it have really been preferable to like he is without his mother now, she is unable to provide any further, and he has now gone through this horrible thing where his mother in the eyes of the state and of society is like a bloodthirsty killer who had to be publicly executed.
Well, and
Right.
it reminds me a lot of like, um, kind of bringing it back to Breaking the Waves, where you talk about like these two opposite things coming from different people can still both prove love. Her giving up everything so her son can have the opportunity she didn't have is a very parental, it's a very loving thing.
Hmm.
But you
Hmm.
talk to, you know, children of their parents who have a good relationship, most of them would say, I would give it up just to keep my parent around a little bit longer.
Of course.
Hmm.
Yeah. And it's she's making the choice because she's the parent, she's the adult. But at the same time, if that kid was given the choice, he may choose to have his mother over having his eyesight.
Yeah. Well,
And
her
that's
worst
like
case
such a
scenario
tough
is,
thing. Yeah.
yeah, no, 100%. Her worst case scenario is blindness.
Hmm.
And she doesn't give her son a chance to say, well, my worst case scenario is that you're dead. Like he doesn't,
Hmm.
she doesn't give him that chance, right? Because
Yeah.
she has
Because
her
Hmm.
principles or whatever.
and it could be that exploration of like we were talking about that with marriage. This is like a parental thing. Parents, plenty of parents talk about how they would give up anything for their children,
Sure.
whether or not their children would want it. They'll give up literally every bit of sacrifice to have them there. And
Yeah.
it's almost like when we're talking about breaking the waves, that challenge of, is that worth it? Is it worth giving up everything if your child has to live without their parent? I mean, it's something they all have to go through, but most time you're not 13, and you're usually, it's not your parent dying in such a violent way.
Hmm.
Hmm. I'm
Yeah.
getting sad all over again talking about this. Um, what were you gonna say,
Chris,
Celeste?
I have a question for you because once again, you sort of inexplicably have a very personal connection to what we're talking about, um, where you have family from Czechoslovakia, and
Mm-hmm.
like Bjork is not Czech, she's Icelandic, and so the
Mm-hmm.
idea
Mm-hmm.
of making her Czech is very much on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And the values that I see her espouse that I find to be super problematic, this like idea of self-sacrifice above all else, this kind of idea of like working yourself to the bone because you cannot extend a hand to help,
Mm-hmm.
this kind
Mm-hmm.
of like honesty and honor, like in keeping a pact that you've made with somebody, even if
Mm-hmm.
it'll kill you. All these things
Mm-hmm.
strike me as like exaggerated versions of like problematic American ideals. Like
Mm-hmm.
this idea of like, oh, I work so hard and sacrifice so much so my kids can have a better future. That's a very American idea, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I wonder, asking you, not necessarily as like an expert, but just like as somebody with personal experience, if you feel as though these are values that are imported sort of from Czechoslovakia, or if this is sort of the thing where an immigrant, because especially in her case, she has to like in modern parlance maybe like beat the communism allegations that keep being thrown at her. She's like overcorrecting and like kind of
Mm-hmm.
overly sort of embodying the most problematic elements of like quote unquote American values to kind of prove herself as a member of American society. I just wanted your take on that.
Sure. Um, the so former Czechoslovakia, right? There
Hmm.
is very, very different cultures. So Slovakia and Czech Republic are very different
Mm.
culturally. I can't speak as much on Slovakia. That's actually where my grandfather was from. His family was from Bratislava. They were like 100% Czechoslovakian. Not there was no mix there. But my grandmother's side was from Czech Republic now, but more of the country. Um, but like the Czech Republic is the home of like Franz Kafka, right? Like, like surreal. It's like the home of surrealism, right? And like
Mm.
very strong like artistic expression, visually strong imagery, and like the values there. I think are if when I spent some time in Prague and like it's a fascinating place. I actually felt very at home, which is a weird thing to say, but like I sort of felt a connection to the city when I was in Prague. They have a very dark sense of humor, very sarcastic. Love just like there's like a comfort with sort of darkness. I don't know how to say it. It's not like they don't like shy away from pain. It's like a culture that kind of
I can
accepts
give you an
and
example of when I was there. I don't know if you got to. We took a night tour. I don't know if you went to the sit where the astronomical clock is or whatever.
mm-hmm,
We're in the
mm-hmm,
center. There's a
mm-hmm.
part where there's like 27 X's on the ground, like that are stone, and they're there. And the whole thing is that it's like 27 people who attempted a rebellion were executed. And it's just like the ability to put that there and talk about it is just like very fascinating, especially like when you go
Yeah,
on the night tours and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah. The Slavic history is filled with a lot of like pain and battles, just like every culture. But they don't really. My experience with Czech people is they have a tendency not to like gloss over the painful parts. They just sort of talk about it matter of fact, or maybe even laugh at it a little bit. But that's slightly different from, I think, the immigrant experience. So I think people that leave that and come to, let's just say, the U.S. I don't know what it's like in other countries, but the few Czech people that I've met, they share one thing, which is sort of this like uh, I'm here for my kids. So even in they're just inherently sort of not there for themselves. So
Hmm.
they're able to kind of disassociate from it doesn't matter what happens to them. Like my grandma, I think to the day she died, she said she had a good life, which is an insane thing to say. Like she objectively did not. But she, the last act of her life, thankfully, after her husband died in like 92 and she died in 2021. Is that right? 2020. She was 101. Yeah, she was born in 1919. So 2020. So she had almost 30 years without him. So she had a nice like end of life, which was good. But like she just didn't think of it that way. She was able to just like disassociate anything that happened to her or the kids and just made sure they all went to school, made sure they got good grades, made sure they like all had jobs, like you know what I mean? Like got married,
Hmm.
like there was like a very specific thing that like she was building it like for them to make sure they were all Catholic. That was very important. But just like, she just had like four things that mattered and nothing else mattered. And it was impossible to get her to move away from those things that mattered. So that's kind of I think I would almost, sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, but I would almost put it like some combination of like the immigrant experience mixed with that just like super stubborn Czech personality that
Yeah.
unfortunately I
Hmm.
got as well a little bit, to be honest. But
Yeah. I mean, maybe I hope I'm not like assigning my own kind of values of condemnation onto this or whatever, but what you've just described also sounds to me a lot like the pursuit of the American dream at all costs, you know?
yeah, yeah. But people that were born, I mean, she was born in 1919, so that was just imagine like just coming out of World War One, right? Her family
Hmm.
grew up. She vaguely remembers the Depression. She definitely remembers World War Two. Like she's just seen like I don't know. I just feel like they, that generation also had a slightly different view of like what was important.
Hmm.
Like to the day she died, she kept everything. Like even to the point of being kind of gross because of the depression experience, right? Like
Sure.
you just like couldn't shake that from her. Like she would only buy what she needed and like she would eat it all and then like when her fridge was empty, she'd go to the store. Like, there was just a different sense of like waste and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Anyways, not to make this all about Grandma Joe. She also was a really fun person who drank two Coors Light and a shot of vodka almost every day, or a shot of tequila almost every day,
Well,
and
you heard it here. If you want to live to 101.
joined the YMCA. I'll tell one more Grandma Joe story just since we're on this, and then I'll get a chance to talk about her on a movie podcast. She would go to the gym every day, 4 days a week, 5 days a week. She'd go to the YMCA, and she would talk about her weightlifting experience in the sense of like she would add every weight. So if she lifted 10 pounds 10 times, she would say 100 pounds, right? So she would always come out and say, "I listed 1,200 pounds today." And it was just a fun like
Like the sum
Actually, true.
total,
yeah, the sum total of all
the
the weight.
aggregate.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
funny.
Yeah, yeah, she was a trip. But I relate to her in the, as a pertains to Dancer in the Dark, just in that stubborn side.
Hmm.
Nothing, her life didn't matter as long as her kids were kind of like taken care of. I don't know. Anyways, long answer there. Sorry, but
No, that's okay. I asked, and that was really interesting.
I will
good.
I will bring up the only thing that bothered me in this movie because it is nitpicky, and I want to because it will definitely show my bias. Was the
Yeah,
courtroom
please.
scene, and it's only because I have been in so many courtrooms in my life, and I'm like, this lawyer is fucking terrible. Please object to something. And then
Uh-huh.
there's like the witness they bring in. Like this is what killed me. And of course, this is taking place in the '60s. You know, maybe surprise witnesses maybe were a little bit more common. But there is no way they would have like the musical dude come in and the defense have no idea this is going to happen. It's like, bro, did you not read the witness list before you came in today to see like what was going to happen? Okay, this guy sucks.
Sorry,
I could have defended her better than this.
Celeste, do you know what Zach does for his day job?
Is he a lawyer? Is that what I'm picking up?
He's
I started as a pre-law major, so that was an intention at one point. I work with children in the court system now, so I
Okay.
am a mentor. So I am constantly in the courtroom all the time.
I think I've
And
been in a courtroom less than 5 times in my life. So
I think it's how many times I've been in like last week. It was maybe so I get it is unimportant because I really just want to tell her because I think it's funny. It is not a problem because really the point of this is she needs to be executed. That is the whole purpose of that scene is we need to
yeah,
show how incompetent this entire because everything in the film one thing I will give like a lot of props to is every little thing, even like the innocuous stuff you wouldn't think about was used against her.
yeah,
Like like when they brought the con, it's like, oh shit, that would be a good thing to bring up because you're in 1964 America, and you're just bringing up that she was pro-communist. Like,
hmm
yeah, that's a good way. And then when
yeah.
they do bring in the one dude who's like, yeah, I have no idea who this lady is. You've lost. She's lost all credibility. Which by that point, she
hmm
lost all credibility anyway because she wouldn't do
Mhm,
anything. So it's
mhm,
like, yeah, I get why the jury said guilty because I sure would have if I was on that jury because
hmm
it's
mhm.
not even for the communism stuff or anything, just
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like, yeah, she's definitely guilty. Like, this looks so terrible for her
yeah. I
every
mean,
Yeah,
step of the way.
yeah. When you're not willing to give the most critical piece of information,
yeah.
on account of your own uh, sort of resignation to, um,
And she may not have got it anyway, but I don't think she gets the death penalty because it's like she did like take
sure,
that thing and beat that dude to death. It's like
uh-huh,
that's hard. That's going to be hard to get a not guilty plea.
sure,
But it's like it wouldn't have been worst case scenario.
yeah,
Yeah. So it's a fun
There,
little piece of the scene. I do like that scene, but it's just like, man, her lawyer is the worst person in this
yeah.
film.
He sucks.
It's like the only thing he did was tell her to stand up when her like when the guilty plea was being read. I'm like, good job, dude. Real court appointed there. Tax dollars
Mm.
at work.
there was one thing about this I feel like I just want to kind of like I don't know how much discussion there is, but I want to at least mention if we're talking about the movie and that despite all of the frustrating things in her personality that kept her from staying alive or whatever, she was portrayed as a very innocent person. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of the pain for me in this movie of watching it and why I've seen it 4 times now, I think, and kind of why I cry basically every time, even when I know it's coming, is that it's just hard to see somebody pure get punished. And I
Yeah.
think that's something for me that is like I just swell up with sadness even like thinking about it because she's just try in her even in her broken logic, she's just trying to do something very
Yeah.
pure and sweet and like ugh, it's just watching it just like like it's just so heavy to like see it play out that way. And that's I think the power of the movie and making the choices that they made in writing this character was that she had to be somebody who was believable as like very pure for this to
Yeah.
work. And
I
then that's a
agree.
power for Bjork to pull it off because she nails it. Like she absolutely nails it.
Hmm.
I would say that when we talk about the trilogy, because the idiots kind of does mess it up because breaking the waves and this just feel like they have so much more in common.
Yeah,
But
totally.
like both her and Emily Watson's character have like this sense of naivete
Yeah.
to them as people. They're almost like what would you say, too precious for the sinful world sort of idea.
Yeah,
um,
sure.
where it's just like they almost live in a fantasy land of what they want the
Mhm.
world to be,
Mhm.
and the world kind of slaps them around for believing that's what the world can be. But then it's
Yeah.
always weirdly hopeful because it's a Van Trier film. So it ends like, as depressed as I am by the end, I am happy she was successful in her own way and her poor kid did get his surgery. As depressed as I am by the end of it.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's the hard part about both these movies, right? Is that they are followed through to their logical conclusion, to use the phrase we've been kind of focusing on.
Well, the second she says there's 107 steps, I was like, that day of execution's worthless. We can go ahead and skip that scene because I know I'm going to get all 107. They've already established it now. There's 107 steps. I will see them all.
Mhm.
we
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
already done it.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah. Yeah.
musical
Yeah.
number and everything.
Oh yeah, I was actually like, oh, and that part where the guard is, it's just going to be us talking about how depressing this movie is. But that part where the guard is helping her like walk, I think is
Oof.
just so pitiful. Like it's so sad.
Yeah.
And then of course, now I want to know like that scene where she doesn't want the hood. I'm just immediately thinking Green Mile. I'm like, huh.
Mhm.
I was like, I need to look up when Green Mile was written
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
because that's all I can
Yeah.
think of is how she, and it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense and it doesn't. It's like she can't see, but I understand why she doesn't want the hood because I guess she can at that point she can still kind of see.
There's another parallel to Emily Watson's character who doesn't want to be imprisoned, right? So this is like her sort of, she doesn't want any confinement, right? She wants to do this on her terms, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's sad when they have to like restrain her so they can hang her. Like when they're
Yeah.
putting the restraint board on her and stuff, I'm like, oh, that's terrible. Because it's
You
like your
know,
last bit of freedom. The last freedom you have
yeah.
is you can stand there on your own.
Speaking of Celeste, things you're talking about doing in your uh, YouTube career, I'm gonna have to go watch some Golden Age exploitation after this to cleanse this, this out of my system because God, I'm getting like all emotional again just talking about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's well executed, and it sucks that there's this history with the movie now where Bjork is simultaneously very proud of her performance as she should be, and also very outspoken about how horrible it was to make it. Because this movie's just, I think it's flawless. Like I haven't officially ranked it in Letterboxd, but it'll go in my top 25, I think, for sure. Top 50 for
Yeah,
sure.
I have a recency bias with this sort of thing, but it feels like a top 100 sort of thing for me. I have a hard
I,
time picturing that list without it.
Yeah.
I can actually go on I just updated mine today. I put mine at 36. So that's
Hmm.
pretty happy with that. So
Wow.
What's 35?
The Witch.
Hell
Oh,
yeah.
okay, nice.
Mm.
That's a personal
Nice.
favorite of mine.
Yeah, I love The Witch. I've seen it a stupid amount of times.
Hmm. I have a Black Phillip tattoo, so
Oh, that's awesome. I'll have, if you got a picture, send it to me later. I'd love to see
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
So, does anyone else want to
Well,
bring up anything else depressing about Dancers in the Dark and just revel in the depression? Or
Yeah, I think my last point I want to make, honestly, I thought of a lot more as the conversation went on, but I'm hungry and we have to call it somewhere. Um, I don't know, like personally, I'm like very, very, very against the death penalty. Um, and this
mhm,
sort of thing, this is every time there's a scene of execution in a film, regardless of how guilty the person is, I have a hard time with it.
yeah,
But this is one of those where it's very clear cut, like the problems that can arise in a system where the state is killing people,
yeah,
in a very broken and very flawed legal system.
yeah,
And there's a moment that stands out to me. You brought it up and it made me think of it, like when they put the hood on her and she protests that she can't breathe, and they're trying, and the the guard is like, "Hey guys, come on, she can't breathe. We got to take this off," and they need to wait for permission to see if that's okay. It's kind of like you're killing her. Like
Yeah,
does it matter if she can breathe or not? Like, what are we doing
right,
here? This is like the most barbaric thing we can do to somebody, and like
right.
you're
Well, it's
concerned
like,
about the particulars about it. It just struck me as a very, very grim moment of irony.
yeah, and
Yeah,
it's a lot of that. Like, I've done a stupid amount of research. I'm very into true crime and stuff. So I've done a ton of, I've read so many stories about like the last 24 hours in the execution house, things that they have to
Hmm.
do, the process. It is a very by the numbers regulated process. It is
Hmm.
probably one of the most regulated things the state can do. Um, it's very fascinating and everything. And like as a, you know, out of body looking at it from above sort of
Oh
thing
yeah,
that
for
they go
sure.
about.
I share a similar fascination with this sort of thing.
But you know, one of the things that always is wild to me is the idea that they have to have a doctor screening to make sure they are healthy enough to be executed.
Uh-huh.
And it's like,
It's insane. Like,
yeah, it's like, are they? It's like, and I mean, it's like the state's looking at it as well. We have to carry out sentence, but we can't do it if they're too sick to get on the gurney. We don't want the poor people who have to
hmm.
watch to see a sick
Oh,
person dead.
interesting.
it
Oh,
it
interesting.
it's so much is like, you see like all the people like in their chairs like watching it, and it strikes me as this like horrifically like macabre theater, like for the
Yeah,
benefit of people so that we can feel as though some kind of justice has been achieved or something has
right,
been resolved.
right.
It's not having to do with like, the actual like philosophical like morals of what is happening. It's very much just like this bloodlust being satiated in a very public setting. um I don't know. The scene is really upsetting to me, um, in a lot of
Y-
ways.
And it's just like the part, you know, they always, I have like a lot of interest in like last words that people come up with. You know, a lot of
Hmm.
people have a very interesting sense of humor right before, I guess you have to in a sense, but you know, it's always like they only give them like a couple seconds. Like I don't even know if I would have thought about it before I got up there and be like, do you have any last words? Like, oh no, I don't guess.
How
I
long
didn't
can
really
I
think that far ahead.
filibuster so that you don't kill me?
Yeah,
How
seriously.
long can I keep it going?
Um, Celeste, there's a really good, well-made anti-death penalty movie. In case you haven't seen it, it's a Japanese movie called Death by Hanging. Have you seen it by chance?
No, I haven't.
I would recommend. I think you would really like it. It's a very dark comedy about the
Hmm.
absurdity of the laws. There's a loophole in Japanese law that basically you can't kill somebody who's I forget. Do you remember exactly the exact loophole? We talked
Well,
about it for the
oh man, it's that was like early on. I'm
yeah
trying to think what
yeah
the
it was early
loophole
on.
was. I mean,
Anyways,
the big thing I remember is, you know, in the U.S. you can appeal to the Supreme Court and really delay your execution for like decades, whereas in
yeah
Japan they secretly set the date. You can appeal, but if the date comes up and the you're still appealing, oh well, sucks to suck.
yeah
Time to go.
yeah
And
yeah
it's a
exactly.
fascinating culture because they don't tell them, they just wake them up in the night and say it's time to go.
Jesus.
I
There's
mean, it's
almost a mercy in that because
yeah, because the weight is
the
has to
the
be the
weight is
worst.
so, I don't know. I think
Yeah.
about it sometimes. It's just something. It's like death anxiety on steroids or something.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, I remember this is I'll keep this because I know you need to get me, but it was I read a whole thing about this guard. It was a head guard for the death house in a Texas prison, and he said he walked like 50 some people to the electric chair. And he said in his years of doing that, he he only had to walk someone to the chair and put them in at one time. He said every other one of them, you got to the room, they walked there themselves every single time. And
Interesting.
it's
Yeah,
just like that is so wild to like
it's
mentally
it,
to be there.
yeah. I mean, it feels like kind of reclaiming some amount of dignity in like what is so
Hmm.
fundamentally like a dehumanizing experience.
Yeah.
That's how I
Yeah.
would. I don't think I could do it. I think I would break down and they'd have to carry me. But like, I think that's the idea.
Yeah. And
But
she
wait, I'm glad
is
we ended up on a happy note. I'm very
Oh,
happy
of
about
course.
that.
yeah.
Well, I guess we could end out with Chris, tell us what me and you are going to be talking about next week. We probably scared Celeste from talking about movies with us for a while. We're just going to pick depressing
No,
shit.
genuinely, this type of thing is my favorite thing to discuss, like morally complex and actually extreme kind of emotional cinema. I don't know. Sometimes I've discussed this with other people, and maybe I'm not as crazy as I think, but like as a person who deals with a lot of like mental health struggles and is often depressed, like these type of films can kind of shake me out of that and like force me to
Mm-hmm.
feel things and get my
Mm-hmm.
brain on something else, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
I really like this type of thing, and I was very excited to do this. And I think this episode turned out really, really good.
I agree. I agree. Even as depressing as it did, I agree.
Mhm.
Well, much like a Von Trier or a Von Trier movie, we, at the risk of being self-indulgent, we've gone on for a long time, but I think at the
Mhm.
end is something beautiful and worth preserving. So I agree with you, Celeste. Yeah, I thought this was, I had no idea how the conversation was going to go, but I'm very happy you were on to do this. I think it was a predestined choice to have you on here from before time.
Thank you.
A very Calvinistic choice to have you on
Mhm.
here. We it's going to be interesting if we're thinking of this in terms of trilogies. So the beginning of the next trilogy, the first two movies in Von Trier's next trilogy, are about Americana, and so the first one is Dogville, which is a movie entirely shot on a soundstage. Um, just out of curiosity, have either one of y'all seen that?
No.
No.
Okay, so Zach, I'll say this: I don't know if you're going to watch it, Celeste, but Zach, it's a 3 hour movie shot entirely on a soundstage, okay? And I know that sounds like torture. And I just have to say, I saw this in the theater and I was tired going in and I was dreading it and I was glued to the screen. I think this is a movie that is severely, I don't know if underrated is the right word, but I think he nails it. Um,
As long as she's not washing dishes the whole time, I think I can make it. I think I'll be all right.
oh, you
Yo,
talking
are
about
you
John
talking
Dillman?
shit on John Dillman? One of my
He,
favorite films of all time.
Celeste, don't
I'll
go read
save my
our
rant then.
don't
No,
don't
it's
go
okay.
read our Reddit post where we all weigh in on John Dillman. But Dogville's one, the five obstructions, which is a very interesting sort of deviation from the narrative films that he made. His Von Trier's mentor challenges him to essentially tell the same story with five different obstacles. I loved this movie as well when I saw it. Super interesting idea. This is probably the weakest on sort of story from him in the sense that that's not the point. The point is to more show the technique of filmmaking and kind of how Venture's mind works, which was really interesting. Um, Say what you will about his personal life, which I think we're all fine to sort of denounce, but his he's got a very brilliant mind for filmmaking. So it's interesting to see that deconstructed a bit. And then Manderley, which is one of the few of his I have not seen, is the third one, which apparently is pretty messed up and there's some animal cruelty, which I'm 100% not looking forward to. But it's all right. We'll see it. So that's what's next. Um, Celeste, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for helping us get through this. So there's a little bit of a break between me and
Yeah.
Chris coming up with things.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I really do appreciate it. I'd be happy to do this again.
Okay, we will take you up on it. We'll go deep into Calvinistic theory here for the next episode and religion. All right, thanks, y'all.
Thank you.